Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Scott.
Governor Noem, congratulations on your nomination.
Thank you.
I think you're going to do a great job.
Thank you.
I think it's great that you're a governor and you bring that expertise to the table. So I just went through the campaign to get reelected, and it was after the Butler shooting. I'd asked people. I said, at all my events, I'd say, raise your hand if you think the acting director of the Secret Service is going to tell us what happened. Not one person. I said, what about Secretary Mayorkas? He's running HHS. What do you think? Or Homeland Security. What do you think? I said, how about Christopher Wray? Head of the FBI? Not one person. Can you just talk about the importance of transparency and accountability in government and how you're going to bring that to the table?
Yeah, Senator Scott, thank you for that question, because that's what I have found across the country as well, and I know it's certainly true in my home state of South Dakota, is that people don't trust the federal government. They don't trust our leadership and this current administration that's in the White House right now to tell them the truth. To tell them the truth about what the threats really are, about our agencies and departments, when there are failures, addressing them and fixing it. The Secret Service is one of those perfect examples. They need leadership that understands why that Secret Service was created and what it needs to do. There's two elements really that the Secret Service is tasked with, and that is protective detail and then also investigations. Yet we see investigators within the Secret Service out there investigating antiquities and other things that are off mission when they should be focused on making sure we're addressing national security events with the protocols that are necessary and protecting the individuals that they're charged with and getting that skill set and training that are necessary. That's been compromised by not having enough people there and being adequately staffed and resourced. But frankly, the leadership hasn't been honest about talking about it. We saw this with the drones over New Jersey as well, the federal government not answering the questions from the public. And when they finally got a straight answer out of President Trump, they felt reassured that somebody recognized that this was something they were questioning and that they deserved answers. My goal and my mission is to build trust. We will undertake a large job and a large duty that we have to fulfill, that the American people expect us to do by securing our border, to make sure that our nation is a nation with borders or we're no nation at all, and that we are making sure that those criminal actors that are perpetuating violence in our communities and in our cities and towns and states are removed from this country, that there's consequences for breaking the law in our country again. There has to be consequences, because when Americans break the law, there's consequences. And why would we ever allow someone to come in from another country and not allow them and not have consequences, or allow them to continue to go forward and to commit rape and murders and break other laws that endanger our society? So we've had over 13,000 murders that are loose in this country that have come over that border. We've had almost 16,000 rapists and sexual assault perpetuators that are loose in this country right now. 425,000 plus people have criminal convictions that are here illegally in this country that our current administration is doing nothing to round them up and get them out of our country. We will be doing that immediately, and that will be the priority. And that is one of the reasons that today the American people have lost their trust. President Trump will build it back and know that their federal government is accountable to them and is working to put America first again.
So Joe Biden completely opened our southern border and dismantled our entire immigration system. As a former governor, I know that when the federal government policies are broken and failing Americans, you see the impacts in your state, just like I did when I was a governor. And you take the steps necessary to protect the families in your state. I know you've done that. One thing you did, as you talked about before, you sent troops, our National Guard, to the southern border. Can you talk more about how Biden's open border policy has affected your state and communities, and the role your state resources placed in helping secure the border?
We certainly have seen the effects in South Dakota that many of your states did, and I would say every state has seen the effects of an open border and the policies that have been under the Biden administration. We saw increased crime, but we also saw increased drug activity. We saw cartel and their affiliates moving into our state to proliferate trafficking, and we saw people being victimized and a lack of accountability with the federal government. So when Texas was addressing the situation and asked other governors for help, we sent help. I know many of the other governors at the time were sending law enforcement, but I made the decision that at that time that it was more appropriate to send the National Guard, that our National Guard could be activated under Title 32 and sent to assist another state from the invasion that was happening, and because the National Guard is trained for just such a mission. Because of this invasion, that it is a war zone down there with what they are going to see, the threats that they would see, and that they are trained specifically to interact with other agencies. The National Guard is used to falling in with other agencies and cooperating with them and could do that seamlessly. And their families and their communities are normalized to them being deployed. So we have in South Dakota deployed our National Guard to the southern border 8 different times. 2 of them were federal deployments that the Biden administration sent them down there. One was to send our Lakota helicopters, which were used for surveillance and the drug interdiction that was going on down there. But 6 other times I sent them under state activation to partner with Texas and other states in securing our southern border. They did security operations. They also did building of the wall and partnered with Texas, recognizing the failures of the federal government. The failures of the federal government are significant, and we've seen our families and communities devastated by those effects, by the drug epidemic, by the trafficking that's going on, the increased crime. And we recognize that just because the federal government wasn't doing their job, we could not fail our state. And I needed to protect the people of South Dakota, and the people of South Dakota were overwhelmingly supportive of these deployments and very proud of our National Guard.
When I was governor of Florida, there was a terrorist attack in Paris by Syrian refugees. So President Obama was president, and I said, I'd like to know if you're going to send refugees to my state, that you give us some background on them. You know, I assume you vetted them and tell us what's going on. You have to tell me, but you ought to tell our state law enforcement and our local law enforcement. All right, that they said, go jump in the lake. They're meaner than that, but they said, go, you know, you have no rights as a governor, which had made no sense. We had over 70,000 people come here after Afghanistan on planes into this country, completely unvetted. All right, they've never given our governors any information. So would you change that?
Yes, the communication between states and the federal government has been absolutely broken. And that's what I love about this committee is you do have governors sitting on this committee that have been in that role as a commander-in-chief and have the responsibility for being the CEOs of their state. It's a different perspective than serving. I served in Congress too, and both are extremely important, and they're just different in that responsibility that weighs on your shoulder. I often told folks that that is the thing that most times, if something was going to keep me up at night, it was the responsibility that I had being commander-in-chief, recognizing the decisions that I made. And I'm sure you had this feeling as well, Senator Scott, as governor, that impacted those families, those soldiers, and it impacted their communities when we pulled them out, and the importance of that. And when they were bringing refugees into the country, I as well communicated that to the federal government. They were bringing refugees, and I asked how they were vetted, how we were working with their home countries to find out who they really were, what their intentions were, and why they were coming to the United States, and received no information from this administration, that vetting process was being done, that we knew where they're going. In fact, they kept us in the dark and didn't communicate to us even what states and where those refugees were being placed. So that is something that we need to change. When we have programs that fall under the purview of the Department of Homeland Security, there needs to be communication, especially with the governors, so that we can coordinate to ensure that it's the right thing for that state.
Thank you.
Senator Hassan.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, you've been kind of a marathon runner. It's 12:30, and I have endured all these questions along with you.
Good.
And so now I'm not going to be a hypocrite and ask a bunch, but I am going to highlight a couple things since you have a bunch of your staff here, because we're kind of at the going forward place. And so information, as you've just alluded to in terms of international stuff, is important here as well. Several people have talked about the BRIC program in FEMA. And what I think is missing in the evaluation is, you know, your initial reaction is, okay, so a bunch of stuff got canceled. And so it's like, okay, why? And it's like, listen, if there was an analysis done and it was like, hey, this flunked it, it was whatever, the answer that we don't want is, well, and I'm not saying you guys did it, but it's like, hey, we ran an algorithm or OMB did something or whatever, and it got canceled. So it's like, well, then tell us who at OMB so we can go to them and say, we'd like to know why you did that, which I think is a legitimate thing. So what I think I'm going to do is, instead of saying, the hard question, well, you'd commit to do a case-by-case review, it's like, you guys got other stuff to do than a case-by-case. What I'm thinking about doing, and the committee members that are still here, thank you for, is to say, listen, each member, you got 3 things you want an answer, a specific answer for, give them to us to transmit on, and they'll do that analysis.
Great.
So that's my thought on that. I'm not a CISA guy, you know that. I mean, I can barely use one of these, God knows who's listening right now. But anyhow, having said that, when I see, and I get elections and redirection and all that other sort of stuff. But when I see, here we go, and we've got Chairman Green and other folks going, my God, China's kicking our butt and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, we did this many through, not that you did, but anyhow, this many retired, this many got this many got that. And then I look at the skinny budgets, like, by the way, we're taking more. And I think somebody got into it. It's like, what is the plan? So when, and you've been there long enough, when somebody goes, hey, you guys presided over cutting $500 million in CISA to do other stuff, what was that based on? Clearly, we don't want to be in the position and won't be in the position of, well, I don't know, that's what they said they needed. Not that there's a trust factor there, there's not, but it's like, we need some building blocks for whoever the CISA people are, whatever. It's like, what's the plan for us to be kicking China's butt, or whatever you want to, however you want to describe it, and how we're still okay on that civilian sector stuff. And by the way, that's stuff we need, because when it comes to markup for this committee to transmit it on to the bigger committee, I mean, we need solid ground for that sort of stuff. TSA, same thing. I'll tell you what I've heard so far is that the state of the equipment that they're using, whether they're screening your purse or your checked baggage or whatever, I'm familiar with one situation where it's like, hey, the equipment's 15 years old. Nobody services it in that neighborhood. They got to have somebody come over the hill from California. And by the way, that takes a while. And in the meantime, they're not screening the bags before they go on the plane, or it takes forever. So we're going to be focusing on, what are you doing to upgrade, just the same as you are on the board. Like, what are you doing to upgrade that technology? And the last thing I've got before we get to thank you, Jesus, closing statement. The last thing is, and we've got around the edge of it, when we talk about ICE operational tempo, I can't tell you how often or how quick it's going to take me to get Amadei from apprehended through whatever the process is and on a plane going back to where he belongs. But we need some structure for, hey, we're just blowing and going, and we'll just let you know. It's like, somebody, I would think that there would be an idea to say, listen, this may change, but right now, from what we know for running the outfit for 4 months, this is kind of our average from stack 'em and rack 'em and 3 hots in a cot to we're going to the airport. Some basis that when you're asked that question, not you, but us, how come what are you doing with detention beds? It's like, well, listen, they got 51,000 now, but here's what we think the operational tempo is going to be. And by the way, if it changes, then all it takes is, we got an uptick, we got a downtick, but we don't expect it to. But some sort of thing to say, listen, the average cost of shipping somebody out, it takes us, we need a detention bed for 6 days on the average, or whatever it is. And that's the problem, Madam Secretary. I don't know what it is. Yeah. So when we say, and somebody said, hey, well, how many more beds you need? It's like, I get you're trying to be responsive, but there's no ability to go say, here's what the number's based on. It may change, but here's what it's based on right now. And so that would be necessary on this stuff. So listen, they wrote this stuff, and they did a great job. Thank you. Before we wrap up, reconciliation, significant investments. Yeah, okay, that's all good. Somebody said that. I know the department hopes to be made whole with reconciliation, but in the meantime, you need to live within your means. It's our job as members to make sure the department is appropriately spending the money Congress provides, as well as to ensure the department has the resources that it needs to execute its mission on an annual basis. That work begins in earnest today as we begin the 26 process. We will move quickly but not hastily, working with every member to produce a bill that will pass the House and floor as we have done in the last few years. I expect the department to be a good partner in the process, and I ask you for your commitment that communication between this committee and your department will be significantly better moving forward. That's not a, what's he mean by that? It's like, we need better communication. I'm interested in going forward. We expect to receive routine briefings and reports from DHS on time and any changes and programs in policy. It is your absolute prerogative to make changes. Please tell us. To be proactively communicated so that we can work collaboratively and to secure the homeland. Here's my promise to you. We won't surprise you. Please don't surprise us. While everybody else is good with that, sometimes, you know, I'm a lot older than you are, so sometimes I react poorly. For the get back questions that members of the subcommittee had today, we ask that you respond in 15 business days. There will be some additional questions members provide in writing. We ask you to respond to those in 30 days. And here's the part you've been waiting for. I'd like to thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here today. The subcommittee stands adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Serving that role. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, congratulations, Governor Noem. You are almost done.
Okay.
We've been through a lot of questions. I think you've handled the questions very well. And there's going to be, I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and I think the ranking member has a few, and I think we'll be done very shortly. I think a lot of Americans, including some conservatives, misunderstand the First Amendment. They think the First Amendment says that Facebook has to publish my opinion, or the Wall Street Journal has to publish my opinion, or we need to force them to be fair. That's not what the First Amendment's about at all. The First Amendment really doesn't apply to telling private companies what we can or cannot say. YouTube censored me, and I despise their policy. They actually took down speeches I made on the floor. But really, I don't have a legal recourse other than I can complain about YouTube being unfair and not hosting, you know, both sides of an issue. However, with the government, though, there is a rule. The First Amendment specifically says Congress shall pass no law banning or abridging speech. And this is what really got us worried about, you know, what not only the FBI was doing, but the Department of Homeland Security, actually meeting with these companies on a weekly basis. And imagine the chilling effect of this. Imagine that you know, there are cameras here, that they're going to end their filming of this interview and then decide, well, you know, what she said or what he said really was misinformation and we should edit that out. Can you imagine? You know, it's just hard for me to imagine that the media has not, which once defended the First Amendment, hasn't been in more of an uproar over the government meeting with the media to decide things. Some of this we didn't know, and then Elon Musk bought Twitter. People asked him, they said, well, you paid $44 billion for Twitter, isn't that too much? And he said, I paid $44 billion to defend free speech. And it's been an amazing service, not only to open up the forum to more viewpoints, but to point out what the government was doing. In this last week, we heard from Mark Zuckerberg, who said that the pushiness, the coerciveness of government meeting with them was unprecedented, and that they pushed back. But he also said worse than them just sort of telling him he should restrict speech, they also threatened him. They threatened to come after him through antitrust law. They threatened to remove parts of, you know, Section 230 of the liability protection. Just to imagine this bully nature of government. And I know you're opposed to that, but if you're confirmed and you're in a position of saying, we're just no longer sending people to meet with media, and the way I describe it is to talk about constitutionally protected speech, because some will say, oh, well, what about, pornography, or what about child trafficking? Those are illegal. Those are not constitutionally protected speech. You have every ability to meet with that. But for constitutionally protected speech, will you tell us in America that you will no longer be sending government agents to meet with the media?
Yes, Senator, I'll work with you to ensure that civil rights and liberties are protected and that we are not in the misinformation and disinformation space like the current DHS is.
The only other thing I would ask on this basis is we will send requests. We sent requests previously, sometimes and often bipartisan requests for information. The Twitter files, Michael Schellenberger, Matt Taibbi, Barry Weiss did a great job of showing what was happening in Twitter and how they were cooperating with government. I think the other investigation that needs to occur is who were the people in government they were talking to? Do they still work at DHS? And can we make sure that they're not in a position of authority? And this is not something I'm going to tell you to do. It's just a request that you have your own investigation, that you have people who work for DHS to say, we are going to look for people who are bringing their political bias to work and trying to influence speech and restrict speech based on their bias, and help us in rooting that out and making sure that these people never again have that responsibility, because I think that I don't think there's ever been anything like this as far as the restriction of speech. And I think the election is largely going to stop and tilt things the other way. But will you help us by looking internally for those who are trying to restrict speech?
Senator, I look forward to working with you on that mission.
I don't have any other questions now, but I think Senator Peters and Senator Blumenthal, and we'll see how it goes. We're going to start with Senator Peters with one more 5-minute round.
Chair recognizes Mr. Guest from Mississippi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, first I want to thank you, the men and women that you serve with, for the incredible success that you have been able to accomplish in just a short period of time. Just looking statistics, and I believe that that is the greatest measure when we're looking at whether or not agencies are successful or not. Comparing statistics from one agency to the other, 1 year to the other, we know that last month CBP reported 11,017 encounters across the southwest border. Looking back a year, so March of 2024, under the Biden-Harris administration, 189,000. March of 23, 193,000. March of 2022, 222,000. So looking at just the metrics of what you and your men and women who serve with you have been able to accomplish, again, I believe is incredible. So when you leave here, please return to those men and women and thank them on behalf of all, not only the members of Congress, but all the people from across this great nation who are in gratitude for their continued service. As Representative Gonzalez said, he and I both serve also on the authorizing committee. And last week we were able to mark up legislation that included roughly $46 billion for additional walls, barriers along the southwest border. And I know that that is something that particularly between Republicans and Democrats, we have had a fundamental disagreement. And I would ask if you would just kind of take a moment to talk about the importance of the investment in walls and borders, barriers along the southwest border, and how that not only does that make our nation safer, but the importance that it is providing to the men and women who serve at CBP to make sure that they can better perform the duties that we've taxed them with.
Well, thank you for talking about the importance of having not just enforcing of our laws in this country, but also infrastructure and security procedures that give us a wall. And that wall may look different based on what the topography is or the geographical location in this country on our southern border, but also on our northern border. And then when you talk about our maritime borders as well, we can't neglect the fact that we have needs there and infrastructure that would help us make sure we know what's coming into this country, who's coming into this country, and if it's appropriate and if they should be. Since President Trump has been in office, we have installed 77.8 miles of new border. That includes steel bollard fencing, but it also includes temporary border and some waterborne as well. We have 11 contracts that have been awarded to put in over 40 miles of new border as well, and we still have 5 contracts that are pending. And I want to thank you for focusing resources to continue to make sure that we're building infrastructure and building in wall and making sure that we're having what we need for each area to address the concerns that are there. That border wall will be built that is steel in areas that it's appropriate for, but the other areas may require us to do buoys. If we do have waterborne areas such as, the Rio Grande and places like that it is required. And then having technology and cameras and the ability to see distances where we may not have the ability to put in fencing and even concertina wire and panels that would be used and are putting in temporarily right now as well. So the diversity of what happens is incredibly important. We're addressing the needs as they see fit, but we're going to continue to move forward with putting up that infrastructure because it does slow down traffic, it sends a message, and it gives our CBP officers more opportunities to truly address the security concerns that we've had in the past.
And Madam Secretary, in the last roughly minute that I have, I want to address an issue that near and dear to my state. March the 15th, we had a series of tornadoes that came through Mississippi. Half a dozen individuals lost their lives that day. It impacted roughly 20 counties, so roughly a quarter of our state was impacted. Shortly after the storms, I, along with many of the other elected officials, we went and we visited those areas that were impacted, and I'll tell you that some of the damage has been extreme. Our governor and MEMA quickly requested disaster assistance, but at this point, the review of that process is still pending. And I understand that takes time, and I don't want to rush anything, but I would ask you if you could make sure that you could do everything to expedite that request. It is impacting my local jurisdictions with debris cleanup. It is impacting people as they seek to recover. So I would just ask that you would personally see if anything could be done to expedite that request. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would yield back.
Yes.
Gentleman yields back.
Yes, I will certainly get back to you and follow up with that. I'm not sure if that decision is still with us or at the White House, but I will follow up with you. And I want to thank you for talking about the fact that you're sitting there waiting for the federal government to respond. President Trump's heart is with the American people and recognizes they don't deserve that. If we had the ability to give resources to a state so they could respond in a more timely manner and do a better job than where the federal government has failed, it would be entirely appropriate. So thank you for that, and I'll follow up with you.
That they should direct their comments to the chair or to the secretary. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Good morning, Secretary Noem, and thank you for joining the committee today to discuss President Trump's budget to fund the crucial mission of the Department of Homeland Security. Before we begin, I want to mention that this is Police Week, a time for us to remember and honor the contributions of the men and women of federal, state, and local law enforcement across this country, including within DHS. I think a lot of people don't realize that there are more badges in HSI than there are in the FBI. So much could be said about all of you who devote your lives to service and to keep us safe. But for now, let me simply say thank you. Thank you, and know that our committee has your back. Madam Secretary, this is your first appearance before the committee, and I look forward to continuing to work closely with you and your team as we strive to undo the damage and the chaos created by your predecessor. When you took office, you inherited an unprecedented crisis at our southern border, at all our borders, created by President Biden, Vice President and Border Czar Kamala Harris, and Secretary Mayorkas. For 4 years, the administration and unaccountable bureaucrats helped craft their extreme agenda, dismantled our secure border, gutted interior immigration enforcement, and implemented a policy of mass catch and release that flooded our communities with millions of illegal immigrants. Under the Biden-Harris administration, Customs and Border Protection recorded more than 11 million encounters of inadmissible aliens at our border. On top of that astronomical number, CBP has recorded roughly 2 million known gotaways, a number that exceeded the previous 10 fiscal years combined. That's more than 13 million inadmissible aliens who violated our sovereign border in just 4 years, around quadruple the number from the first Trump administration, and all because the administration's policies and rhetoric encouraged them to do so. The first few months of the second Trump administration provided a remarkable contrast. Under your and President Trump's leadership, the Border Patrol has apprehended just around 25,000 illegal crossers at the southwest border. By comparison, in December of 2024, more than 47,000 illegal crossers were apprehended, We went from a record 301,000 illegal crossings at the southwest border in December of 23 to just over 7,000 in March, an astonishing 97% decrease. It turns out we didn't need comprehensive immigration reform or woefully misguided Senate border bill that was pushed by the former secretary. We just needed a president willing to enforce the laws Congress had already passed. Because illegal aliens now know that President Trump will have them removed from the country, they've stopped coming. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle understand this. They do not want to talk about these victories because they know that for 4 years they stood on the wrong side of this issue, defending open borders and the abolition of ICE. They also understand the American people do not trust them on the issue of border security and immigration enforcement, in large part because of their radical stances. I expect they'll spend a lot of time today twisting the truth to mislead the American people. I look forward to hearing you set the record straight. And while we're talking about Democrats' anti-enforcement extremism, I'd like to briefly extend my regrets to you, Madam Secretary, and to the entire DHS workforce for the antics we saw on display outside the Delaney Hall detention facility last week. Right now, attacks on law enforcement across this country are up 400%. Public officials should be sending a clear signal that these brave public servants are to be respected and not assaulted. However, on Friday, current and former Democrat members of this committee stormed their way into an ICE facility in Newark, causing mass chaos, and verbally and physically accosting members of federal law enforcement in the process. I'd like to share a video.
The Department of Homeland Security is warning there could be more arrests following the incident that you see here.
I'm embarrassed by what I saw, and everyone should be. This behavior is utterly unbecoming of a citizen, let alone a member of Congress. Democrats may talk a big game about law and order, but these actions are a violation of the sacred principle. Not only have Democrats excused these actions, but they've actually tried to blame ICE for what happened. When you punch a law enforcement officer, that's not the law enforcement officer's fault. This behavior demands a swift and firm response, and I assure you action will be taken. Despite Democrats' best efforts to prevent it, the Trump administration has ended the immediate crisis at our borders. However, more work remains, particularly in removing the millions of individuals who have no lawful basis to be in the United States. It is essential that we swiftly fund enforcement efforts through the reconciliation process. Congress must also codify President Trump's successful policies to ensure they can withstand the schemes of open border radicals. Meanwhile, the open border is not the only threat our nation faces. While the Biden-Harris administration had its back turned, the Chinese Communist Party executed brazen operations on U.S. soil, including running secret police stations in our cities and conducting surveillance operations. On top of that, Chinese-affiliated firms are buying up U.S. farmland and commercial properties, including in areas near sensitive government and military sites. More than 60,000 Chinese nationals illegally crossed our southwest border between fiscal year 21 and 24. Most of them were released by the Biden administration into the interior, despite us not having their true intentions or backgrounds. The CCP is pushing the envelope harder than ever. Consequently, we need a robust, innovative, and consistent effort to push right back. Our cyber borders also remain under assault. Most notably, malicious cyber actors associated with the Chinese government have targeted us with some of the most sophisticated and sustained hacking operations we have ever seen. The Salt and Volt Typhoon intrusions revealed significant gaps in our cyber posture, compromising Americans' private data and key sectors of our critical infrastructure. We have not forgotten devastating attacks like the Colonial Pipeline in the spring of 21, which led to oil and gas shortages across our country and lines at almost every gas station. We cannot stay ahead of these evolving cyber threats if we do not have the right people with the right skills to defend our nation. Today, more than 500,000 cyber positions across this country in both public and private sectors are currently unfilled. That's 500,000 cyber professionals not on the front lines to defend us from the malicious activity jeopardizing our national security. That's why I introduced the Cyber Pivot Act, which would create an ROTC-like scholarship program enabling men and women across this country to gain hands-on experience in cybersecurity or related fields in exchange for a period of required government service across any level of government. Earlier this year, the committee favorably reported the act to the House. Democrat Senator Gary Peters, ranking member of the Homeland Security Governmental Affairs Committee, and Senator Mike Rounds, chairman of the Senate Armed Services Subcommittee on Cybersecurity, introduced a companion legislation to this in the Senate. It's time to bring this bill to the floor for a vote. Madam Secretary, I look forward to working with you on finding creative solutions to our cyber workforce shortage, as well as ensuring that the agencies under DHS tasked with defending our cyber borders, primarily CISA, remain focused on their task. As your budget rightly indicates, the agency's censorship of millions of Americans will come to an end. Instead, CISA's engagement with the private sector must focus on protecting critical infrastructure and our federal civilian networks. This must include streamlining burdensome regulatory requirements and ensuring CISA remains a trusted and reliable partner to the public and private sectors. I trust that over the next 4 years, you'll devote maximum effort to dismantling the censorship industrial complex while ensuring that CISA is positioned to succeed at its core mission. These are some of the most substantial challenges, but many more await. Madam Secretary, I expect continued progress on all of these issues, but I'm equally confident in your leadership and resolve to get this job done. Together, let's resecure.
Governor Noem, welcome, and thank you for your willingness to serve. You'll be taking over a massive federal government agency, 240,000 employees. It's probably too massive. I think had I been there back then, I don't think I would have assembled these 22 different agencies in this massive department, but that's what we've got. It's a department that the previous administration, I think, has completely misused. Instead of using Customs and Border Protection to do that, to protect our border and secure it, they've utilized those resources to incentivize a massive influx of illegal immigration. Instead of using the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency to do that, they instead engaged in mission creep and utilized it to censor Americans with the Misinformation Board. I am concerned about disaster relief, just federal disaster relief in general, creating greater and greater and increasing levels of moral hazard, resulting in higher costs of these disasters. So let's cover each one of those kind of in order. How do you gain control over a massive agency whose resources and personnel have been misused? I mean, how do you root out those individuals who, instead of securing our border, opened it up and facilitated this?
Well, Senator, this has been a big topic of conversation in most of the meetings that I've had with the members of this committee was how do we fix this agency, which the reputation is that it's broken and dysfunctional. I think that was the question I get asked the most is why would you want to head up such a dysfunctional department? And I would say that because the mission of the department is to secure the homeland and our people. It's our biggest vulnerability right now. And we have a president that's not enforcing the law. And I don't believe the law should be unequally applied. Everyone's to be subject to our laws, and a nation without laws and without borders is not a nation at all. So I will work by ensuring one of the things that Senator Ernst talked about, people have to show up for work. I think there's going to be a majority of people who don't have their primary mission to secure the homeland, that if they don't want to show up for work, then maybe they're just not truly passionate about protecting America. I think they need to do that, and they need to recognize what their job is. The morale in DHS is very low. I'm going to let people do their jobs. I'm going to remind them what their jobs are. Some of these Border Patrol agents haven't been able to do their jobs for a very long time. They've been processing paperwork and facilitating an invasion when they should be back securing our border, which is why they were recruited and wanted to serve there to begin with. We're going to build partnerships with local law enforcement, with ICE and task forces. So we're communicating again with local sheriffs and mayors and law enforcement to partner together. When you talk about the fact that this is such a broken agency that needs so much improvement, a lot of it goes back to why we're recreated and are we fulfilling that mission and making sure that these individuals are getting back on task.
So under my chairmanship and under the Trump administration, we did rename a part of DHS, the Cybersecurity Information Security Agency. I in no way, shape, or form ever contemplated that the sub-agency within DHS that was really focused on securing us against the cyber threats and other threats to our infrastructure would ever be used to violate the Constitution the way it was used to violate the Constitution under the Biden administration. This administration has been completely opaque. We do not have the information to know and the communication in terms of what all happened here. So my question relates to how they misused CISA. Will you commit to providing the transparency, providing the information, investigate it yourself, but provide this committee, my subcommittee, the information to expose the truth to the American public, but even more importantly, propose a piece of legislation based on our investigation, based on those results, to fix it so that no administration can ever misuse the language of the law to commit that kind of unconstitutional act and violate people's First Amendment rights.
Yeah, Senator, I look forward to working with you on that. And I think what we saw during the COVID pandemic, the actions of CISA, their misinformation and disinformation campaign, the materials they were putting out was shocking. Shocking at what they were doing to decide what was truth, what wasn't, and how they were trying to manipulate the American people. We saw it in elections and Russia influence as well. And so ensuring that they can't do that in the future under any administration would be a priority, that they stay doing what they're supposed to do, and hardening our systems and working with local officials to do that is a priority. And I'd look forward to working with you on legislation should you wish to rein them in.
So the first step in that process is to expose the truth, to find out who these bad actors were, expose who they were, hold them accountable. I mean, that is crucial that we take that first step. So again, look forward to working with you on that. You know, the tragedy of the California fires, the more we learn, the more we understand that not only was it predictable, it was predicted, which means it was preventable. Again, you're not going to be, you can't prevent the initiation of those fires, but you certainly can prevent them from raging into the tragedy that they became, the dozens of people who've lost their lives, the hundreds of billions of dollars worth of property damage. It's not just California, though. I mean, again, that was grotesque mismanagement. That could have been prevented. You can't prevent a hurricane. You can't prevent floods. But you certainly can try and start reducing the moral hazard that we've allowed to explode, quite honestly, by the federal government rushing in immediately, no questions asked, just tell us how big a check you want. What can you do in your new role to try and start reducing over time the moral hazard that we have created in this country with federal disaster relief?
Well, Senator, emergencies and disasters are always locally led. They're led by the local communities and leaders, and that's because they're much more responsive and much better informed on how to bring relief and to get those emergency services there to meet the need. Then it's state supported and federally resourced. Which means that when we come in, that we're supporting what the mission is, what those emergency operations and plans are that the local city and county and then also the state has implemented and do what we can to fulfill the mission of our programs. One of the things that FEMA's not doing today that I think we should be doing is streamlining communications. We saw this in New Orleans. We saw it in other terrorist attacks in the country. And you just referenced it as well about the American people not getting the truth, senators not getting the truth and the transparency that we need, is that I believe FEMA can always put out a blueprint for what a response would be should something terrible happen. And when we look at the Secret Service, what happened in Butler, we saw that communication was an issue, that the Secret Service wasn't communicating and balls were getting dropped with local authorities, local law enforcement, and we can put forward a blueprint for how communication can happen and be streamlined between the federal government, the state, and the local entities, so that should something happen, this is how we talk to each other, to make sure that the public has the facts, they're not getting misinformation, which happened with the New Orleans terror attack just recently, but also up in Pennsylvania as well. That blueprint is what we do at the state level that FEMA has failed to do, to proactively educate the public on what everybody's roles are, what we do should something happen, whether it be a natural disaster or a terrorist attack or an emergency response is needed, that we can put out those blueprints ahead of time, educate people, train those local entities, which they currently do to a certain extent today, but not good enough to really know that not only can the resources be pre-deployed in many of these situations so that they're more readily accessible, but also how are we going to communicate and make sure everybody's on the same page so that we can be much more efficient. I wish that we would have had different leadership and a different governor in California, or we might have a different result there. But in the Department of Homeland Security, we can do all that we can to make sure that the people that live in California know that they're going to get a response from the federal government that's appropriate, and we did all that we could to make sure that they had the information ahead of time so they could protect themselves when they do have a failure in leadership like we've seen.
Well, thank you and good luck.
You bet.
Since Senator Johnson brought
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Governor Noem, welcome. Congratulations on your nomination. I'm delighted to see you here. I do notice the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee is over your shoulder there. I'd have to question your judgment about who your friends are based on that. The great chairman from the state of Missouri. It's fantastic to have you here. You know, the Department of Homeland Security is not particularly old, but you already have what I hope will soon be the distinction of succeeding the worst secretary in the history of the Department of Homeland Security. Alejandro Mayorkas has been an absolute disgrace to that department and frankly to this country. And I'm delighted to see you willing to step up and serve. Let me just ask you something. I repeatedly asked your predecessor when he sat where you're sitting whether the southern border was secure. And he repeatedly told me under oath, it is secure, Senator. And he repeatedly said under oath, our policies are working, Senator, meaning the Biden administration policies that, of course, gave us this devastating open border. So let me just ask you, is the southern border secure as we find it today?
Senator, no, the southern border is not secure today, but in just 3 days, we will have a new president in this country, President Donald J. Trump, and he will secure our border.
That is refreshing candor. I'm glad to hear it. Let me ask you about a young man from my state. This is Travis Wolf, who's 12 years old when he was killed just over a year ago by an illegal migrant who mowed him down, and I choose my words carefully, mowed him down in a motor vehicle, hit him head on, doing 75 and a 40, killed him. Others were severely injured. Just yesterday, a witness sitting where you are sitting today told this committee that migrant crime is, and I quote, not an actual concern. Not an actual concern. In a hearing before this committee advising us to drop the Lake and Riley Act and not focus on migrant crime. You know, in my state, with the death of people like Travis Wolf and Officer David Lee, who was assaulted and killed in St. Louis, and officers in Kansas City who have been assaulted by illegal migrants, and others who have been carjacked and stabbed, would you agree with me that migrant crime sure as heck is an actual concern and that you intend to do something about it?
Yes, Senator, absolutely. And I'm so sorry about Travis and my prayers go out to his family. I can't even imagine what that is like. And thank you for telling his story, because there's so many families in this country that have that same story. And they don't understand why the federal government is allowing people to come into this country illegally and then perpetuate crimes against their people and then give them resources and shelter and food and debit cards to go take care of their families when they go to work every single day to make sure that they're providing for their families and are held accountable to when they break our laws. So,
let me ask you this. Will you work with President Trump to reinstate the Remain in Mexico program that the president had in place in his first term, which does so much to ensure that those who would seek to abuse our asylum system are not allowed into the country, and those who have legitimate asylum claims, their claims are processed in due order and in due course, but they wait in Mexico until those claims are fully processed. Will you work to reinstate that program?
Yes, Senator, the President and I have talked extensively about this and will 100% partner with him to reinstate the Remain in Mexico policy and make sure that it's in place.
Fantastic. I think Travis might be alive today if that policy had been in place. Let me ask you about CBP One, the phone app that I've called Concierge Service for Illegal Immigrants. I'm sure you're familiar with it. This was the Biden administration's effort to allow asylum seekers to apply ahead of time using their phones, but not actually to provide any evidence that they needed asylum. There was a newspaper report, a press report that said the only problem with the app is it never asks users, are you seeking asylum? They don't ask for any asylum evidence. They simply release these so-called asylum seekers who use the app into the country on parole. Sometimes they're never given a hearing. The Inspector General actually did a report, a full investigation report on CBP One, and found that frequently users of this app were claiming the same addresses in the United States as their intended destination, even though they didn't know each other, they weren't family connections. In other words, it has been completely abused. And the idea that the federal government would pay for this kind of concierge service for illegals, I think is outrageous. Will you end the use of the CBP One app?
Yes, Senator, if confirmed, and I have the opportunity to be secretary on day one, CBP One will be shut down. There's data and information in there that we will preserve so that we can ensure we know who's coming into this country and who's already here that we need to go find, but also we make sure that there's another program, CHNV, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, where our federal government actually paid to fly people into this country directly from other countries without any vetting or knowing who they are. So there's several of these programs that need to be eliminated, and we need to ensure that we're following legal immigration laws.
I'm glad you just mentioned CHNV. This is this is a mass parole program. Of course, as you know, our law allows parole in only very limited circumstances. There are two circumstances, and it requires case-by-case evaluation. The present administration, soon to be gone, has granted mass parole in direct defiance of the law, not case-by-case evaluation. The CHNV program is one of those instances. Will you put a stop to this abuse of our parole law and our asylum system?
Yes, we will go back to case-by-case evaluation of these parole cases and ensure that we have more resources if you will partner with us to make sure that our legal immigration system is fully utilized, that we have more judges, more immigration courts so that we can process people legally and make sure that they are going through that process rather than, like Joe Biden has done, use this as an excuse to allow people to come into our country with no consequences.
Let me ask you about another low light, not a highlight, but a low light of this last administration and DHS. Your predecessor, the current Secretary of DHS, established a disinformation board using taxpayer resources to police speech on the internet and elsewhere, to tag American citizens' viewpoints as either legitimate or not legitimate, and use the power of the state to censor them, including having them removed and perhaps penalized. This has got to be the darkest chapter, I think, in DHS's short history. He eventually withdrew the board under intense criticism, but has never fully repudiated it and never promised not to do it again. Will you pledge to us here today that under your leadership, there will never be a disinformation board or anything like it at DHS, and you will be a champion for the free speech and First Amendment rights of all Americans?
Yes, Senator, there will not be a board such as that under my leadership at the Department of Homeland Security.
Fantastic.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you in my remaining seconds, just one more thing about the Secret Service. You've mentioned this, and I'm so glad that you did. This committee, and it has been bipartisan, this committee has done bipartisan work on the attempted assassinations, or the assassination attempts, I should perhaps say, of the former president, soon to be the future president, soon to be the president, President Trump. We were stymied at every turn. And I should use the present tense. We are currently being stymied at every turn by the current Secret Service leadership and, frankly, by the leadership of DHS, who have refused to turn over documents, who refused to make people available for interviews. We finally had to pass my own law in this committee, which we unanimously adopted, a law, a statute, mind you, which would require DHS and Secret Service to turn over relevant information to us about the assassination attempts. It's unbelievable. When you come to office, to this office, I hope very soon, will you pledge to us that you will open the books on all of the facts associated and around these assassination attempts, that you will make available to us and to the public, most importantly, all the facts so that we can ensure that this never happens again and that the needed reforms in the Secret Service are put into effect.
Yeah, Senator, if I am the Secretary of Homeland Security, I will certainly work with you to build transparency and make sure the facts are shared with you and your committee. I know that you've been very frustrated by the lack of transparency from the department, and I want to thank those of you that have worked on that report that was put together on these assassination attempts. I know it was a bipartisan report and investigation that this committee conducted, and I appreciate you focusing on that, and I will work with you to get the information so that you have the truth of really what happened there and the failures so they can be fixed.
Thank you. That's a great place to end, and a high note as I see my friend Senator Blumenthal, who did fantastic work on this effort, and it will be an incredible an incredible new day, and incredibly refreshing to have a DHS secretary who will tell us the truth, who will be honest with us about the facts, honest with the American people, and who will enforce our law. And I know you'll do that, Governor Noem. I look forward to supporting your nomination. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Senator Blumenthal.
Due process. The gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Ms. Green for 5 minutes questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Democrats have spent the last 4 years terrorizing Americans with their open border policies. They flooded our communities with over 13 million illegals from over 170 countries and territories who invaded our borders, raped our women and children, and murdered our own people. It's shocking to hear them to continue to defend cartels, MS-13, and terrorists today. Democrats claimed over and over again that legislation was needed to fix the problems that they created, yet to this day, no new border legislation has been enacted, and border crossings are down 93%. It was just reported that according to CBP, only 5 aliens were temporarily released into the United States in all of April. Only 5. This is compared to the 68,000 released in April of 2024 under the Biden administration. Thank you, Secretary Noem, for your great work and your leadership. This is truly saving America. There's nothing Democrats love more than defending the cartels, the criminals, and the rapists, and now we finally have a president in the White House and an administration that defends the American people. As you're aware, Secretary Noem, CISA previously developed a censorship laundering scheme through its counter mis, dis, and malinformation, MDM, efforts that suppress conservative opinions and went after President Trump's supporters. Members of Congress, senators, including myself, were permanently banned. I was permanently banned on Twitter under this. What started as an election interference campaign eventually developed into censoring issues well beyond the election and COVID and climate change. Through their NGO partnerships, tickets were created on posts they thought were misinformation and subsequently sent to social media platforms with recommendations for them to be censored. Would you please provide an update on your efforts to investigate the severity of MDM efforts during the Biden regime, and what steps are you taking to ensure CISA will never again serve as the United States government's Ministry of Truth?
Yeah, no, thank you, Congressman. The CISA definitely was so far off mission that they forgot what their purpose clearly was. The CISA was created to hunt down bad actors and to harden our systems, to support local infrastructure, critical infrastructure that makes this country run, and those small and medium-sized businesses that don't have the resources to make sure that their software programs, their technology was secure from hackers and from bad actors around the world. Instead, what they were doing by out there deciding what was truth, what wasn't truth, censoring what people could say, was not their mission whatsoever. And so we have stopped those activities. We have refocused our resources back onto the cybersecurity mission and ensured that CISA is cooperating with our local and state individuals and businesses to make sure that we're truly being proactive at not just hardening our systems, but stopping the attacks that we have from countries that hate us. So the Ministry of Truth, as what CISA was operating before, was wrongful actions that were taken by employees of this administration, the last administration, to go after political targets, to manipulate the information that Americans were receiving, and that has stopped. We have fallen far behind in what we've been able to do as far as cooperating with other intelligence agencies and with those at the state level to make sure that we're being proactive. And that's one thing that we have focused extremely hard on in the last several months, is ensuring that those relationships are built back up, that we're partnering with private businesses to get the support that we need to make sure that we are hardening America's systems, because we're vulnerable to our weakest link. And oftentimes our weakest link is that small business or individual that ties into our largest systems.
Yes, thank you. No American should be censored by their government for their political beliefs and their statements. Thank you for that. Also, the Trump administration has committed to reuniting unaccompanied alien children lost or trafficked under the Biden-Harris administration back to their families and guardians. What efforts is DHS taking to ensure that these vulnerable children are safely reunited with their loved ones? Because the Biden administration lost hundreds of thousands of children.
Yes, absolutely. We know that there was upwards to over 300,000 children that were lost during the last administration. So President Trump has made it a priority of every cabinet secretary and agency to make sure those children are located, that they are returned to safety. As you know, the refugee program and sponsors were greatly abused under the previous administration, and the Department of HHS is bringing some integrity back to that program and making sure that these children are cared for appropriately, and that someone is watching over them that truly has their best interests at heart, that really truly cares for them as a family member. I would say over 5,000 have been found, and our HSI individuals and law enforcement officers are continuing to identify them.
Gentlelady's time has expired. I now recognize Ms. Ramirez for 5 minutes.
Look forward to 7-minute rounds.
It is the practice of the committee to swear in witnesses. Secretary Noem, please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony you will give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. Secretary Noem, thank you for appearing today. As you know, I've been concerned for a long time about gain-of-function research. I commend the president and the administration for having an executive order to stop it. Some of the problems are in the definitions of it. You know, Anthony Fauci said if it's an animal virus, it can't be, it cannot be gain-of-function. And yet animal viruses can be trained to infect humans. And we think that's what happened ultimately with COVID-19. We think some of the dangerous research is going on at the lab controlled by DHS. Have you begun to look into this? I know Secretary Kennedy said that you and he will be going out, and I've requested permission to attend that as you go out to look at these labs. Have you looked at these labs any yet to get a feeling for what gain of function?
Mr. Chairman, are we going to have opening comments from the Secretary, or are we skipping that as well?
Oh, I've neglected that. I went right into questions without doing that. So
it's your committee, Mr. Chairman.
Let's start again. Secretary Noem, you are. Well, great. You got a preview of my questions since I went out of order. But
That's all right.
The NBAC, the National Biodefense Analysis and Countermeasure Center out there by Fort Detrick, we're concerned they're still doing some dangerous research out there, and it needs more oversight. Do you have any update for us on that?
I do, and I want to thank the chairman for bringing a lot of history to my knowledge of this lab and the work that it was doing, and I appreciate Secretary Kennedy's input as well. Yes, we do have a visit planned in the future here in the next 10 days to 2 weeks with Secretary Kennedy to look into the work that this lab is doing and if it is appropriate for the Department of Homeland Security to be engaged in that. I think your concerns have created some oversight that is very helpful and will be helpful in making sure that they're doing correct research that actually is beneficial and not research that's been abused in the past.
So the president has banned gain of function, and as you and I have discussed, it's important that someone can simply come forward who disagrees and says, well, this doesn't meet the definition of gain of function. This is essentially what Anthony Fauci did when everybody said the research in Wuhan was gain of function. They were taking an animal virus, They're running it through an animal model with human lungs over and over again and adapting it to be infectious in humans. That is gain of function. So the people and personnel make a difference. And so what I would ask is, as you ask the career people out there who've been doing the experiments, you realize that their natural tendency is to want to keep doing what they've been doing. So I think it's going to take scrutiny, new people, new scientists, consultants to look at each one of these and say, don't just tell me you're not doing it. Give me a list of 20 or 30 experiments. What are you doing? And as an example of that, you know, we've been sending records requests for 3 years and we got nothing until you came into office. And I hope that you will be looking at our records requests. They're all dated in time, some of them by 5 Republicans, some of them by Republicans and Democrats, and they were just routinely ignored. Have you had a chance to look at the chain of questioning here to see if there's anybody that was actually purposely obstructing us?
Yeah, so I thank you for asking those questions and talking about the follow-up to members of Congress, senators and representatives. My predecessor didn't respond to anybody. It didn't matter if you were a Republican or a Democrat. He didn't respond to your letters and your oversight. And I've tasked all of my people with changing that about our Department of Homeland Security, that we will be responsive to Congress. We've given you about 50,000 pages, I think, so far of information. We continue to get and gather more data and facts that we can return to you so you can conduct oversight. What I would say is between NIH and the Department of Homeland Security, there are no research projects ongoing right now today or that we've been able to find as far as projects they were doing together. We did have a couple of employees that were contracted for their specialty backgrounds that have done work over at NIH before, but that kind of oversight needs to happen. And I think it's important that we have an independent outside source that also is reviewing the work that they do.
As you're collecting the records, I would just ask that you ask the people, why wasn't it given before? And see if you can find where the chain of command ended. Were there people purposely not giving us the records because they really shouldn't be employed by government? Secretary Mayorkas has told us repeatedly that there was no censorship going on. The CISA wasn't doing anything. They weren't involved with speech. We know from the Twitter files they were. Have you ever uncovered any internal communications or activities that contradict their testimony with regard to the government being involved in censorship?
Yes, sir. We have literally found thousands of documents that have proven that they were involved in censorship and policing speech. So we will be unveiling these to this committee and making sure we're exposing what CISA was doing with a vast majority of its time of certain employees. And some of the discussion I think we'll have here today is about getting CISA back on mission and some of the reductions in staff that have been over there. And that's reflective in the fact that many of them were doing work that they shouldn't have been doing.
And I hope you'll look at our bill, the Risky Research Review Act. Administrations do a lot of things and a lot of good things, and then they go away when the next administration comes in. The good thing about this legislation, it would be a presidential commission of scientists to define on a continual basis what is or isn't gain of function, to rule on that. It's been voted by in a bipartisan way. It was a unanimous vote out of this committee. It's one of the few things in Congress we actually, I think, have bipartisan support for. So we hope the administration will look at that and consider making a public endorsement of that. Okay. That way we can make permanent the things you're trying to do to constrain gain of function. Thank you for that, your testimony. And with that, I recognize Senator Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Members will be recognized by order of seniority for their 5 minutes of questioning. Because we have a restricted time window for the Secretary today, just as we did with the last Secretary, I will again limit to 5 minutes. So if you're going to go over, you know, you're going to get a light tap, and then eventually we'll get a little heavier. But the goal here is, and I will, as I always do, apply the standard equally to both sides. 5 minutes is 5 minutes today. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Secretary Noem, in the first 100 days, President Trump made border security a top priority by increasing immigration enforcement, deploying additional DHS and DOD personnel to the border, and restarting construction of the border wall. President Trump's decisive strategy was a sharp departure from his predecessor. Former President Biden refused to enforce federal immigration laws, sparking the most severe border crisis in our nation's history. Under President Trump's and your leadership, the tide has turned. Secretary Noem, which of the President's decisive actions do you believe sent the strongest message to both the cartels and would-be illegal border crossers that the United States is no longer open for exploitation?
You know, Mr. Chairman, I believe that the strongest thing President Trump did was to make an announcement that we would start following our federal laws, that not only would our border be secure, but that those who crossed it illegally would be considered breaking the law like it should be, and that they would be prosecuted. They would be removed, and that it would no longer be a facilitation of an invasion like the Biden administration had put forward. He clearly sent that message, and before I was even sworn into this job, told me that I needed to be aggressive in going out there and telling the world that America was under new leadership, that we were a nation of laws, and that they would be enforced going forward, and that American and the people that lived here were going to be put first.
Secretary Noem, the President has secured the border largely through executive action, but as we know from the Biden-Harris administration, those actions can be undone by subsequent presidents. What are the top 2 to 3 security immigration enforcement policies that Congress must act urgently to codify so they are no longer executive orders but federal law?
We know President Trump has specifically asked that the executive orders that he's put into place be codified into law so they could be long-lasting. So I'd encourage this body to look at everything that he has put forward in an executive order to see if it could be permanently enacted to secure our nation. I would say enforcement and clarity on what parole is, what asylum is, give us some clarity to make sure that that is something that will be long-standing, interpreted as to how it was intended when the original law was passed, and then ensuring that we have the ability to take action when criminals are in this country, continue to focusing on getting them out of their country and how those diplomatic relations work with repatriating their citizens back home.
Secretary Noem, as I mentioned in my opening statement, you inherited an unprecedented border crisis. In the last 4 years, a total of over 1,700 known or suspected terrorists were apprehended at the border. In the 4 years prior to that, it was 1,700. From your perspective as DHS Secretary, can you highlight how the open border policies of the last administration increased the risk to American families when it came to violent criminals and terrorists entering the country?
Absolutely. Mr. Chairman, we truly don't have any idea how many dangerous individuals are still in the United States of America. Since President Trump has been in office, just in these few short months, we have deported over 250 known terrorists out of the country. These are individuals that were allowed to come into our country unchecked by the previous administration. We have deported thousands of criminals that have perpetuated the worst of the worst crimes on our communities, murders, rapists, child pornographers, traffickers, and we have returned them back to their home countries. The message that was sent by the last administration was, come to America, send your worst of your worst. They're given free rein to make a home here and given every opportunity. In fact, we'll even facilitate their housing, their food, their clothing, and take care of them and treat them better than we treat U.S. citizens. That was Joe Biden's policies. What President Trump has done is follow the law. He has implemented the law and said that American citizens should come first and be prioritized as far as their safety, and that everybody should be treated equally, that the scales of justice should treat everyone exactly the same, and that's what he has implemented. So I'm grateful he's given us the ability to go after the worst of the worst and to remove them from our country, because our communities overwhelmingly get safer every day as these individuals are removed.
Thank you, and in keeping with my commitment to be inside my 5 minutes, I will now yield to the ranking member for his 5 minutes.
Senator Hyde-Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I certainly want to thank Madam Secretary for being here today, and so impressed with the way you have just taken off so quickly in leading this agency. You know, as a member of this body, as an American, but as the mother of a 26-year-old daughter, I certainly appreciate what you're doing to secure our homeland. And your commitment has just been unsurpassed by anybody. And I've watched you closely, and it's a tall drink of water. Heading this agency is no small task, but I am certainly supporting you. I would like to briefly mention the proposed reductions to the FEMA budget. You know, in Mississippi, we have hurricanes, we have tornadoes, and FEMA has been a part of my life ever since I have been in public office because of the situations. Even Senator Shaheen was part of our tornado one time last year. in Mississippi, and we had some recently that hasn't been approved yet. Little town in Walthall County, Mississippi, called Tylertown, Mississippi, had a tornado. I was there the day after the storm, and we're really seeking some relief there. But how will DHS make sure that states like Mississippi, which, like I said, are feeling the impact of so many, will continue to receive the support they need to prepare for and recover from what we have now and future emergencies?
Yeah, President Trump has been very clear that he believes that the way that FEMA exists today should not continue. It needs to be reformed. It needs to empower states to build in the structure that they need to best respond to disasters. He's seen the failures over the years of FEMA, how it didn't show up for individuals. It targeted people based on political party. It claims they haven't been paid for 15 to 20 years and recognizes the best responders are those locally and that the federal government should be there to support. So his goal is to redo this agency in a way that empowers our states, recognizing that every state's not at the same level of response today, that it's going to take some effort to get them all ready to really, truly take over the emergency management processes of their state. And so what we can do to equip and to train them and then give control back locally is critically important. Also, the grants that have come through FEMA, making sure they're not being abused to facilitate illegal immigration, to focus on true resiliency, on true helping building dams and infrastructure, culverts that are the right size, instead of using them for bike paths and shade trees like the Biden administration does. So making sure that the dollars that we have in this agency, which consistently is spending in the red and not able to be budgeted for because of what happens, he wants to make sure that those reforms are happening where states are empowered to do the response and trained and equipped, and then the federal government would come in and support them and financially be there when they need them on their worst day.
Thank you, because there's many days we really need them. And Mississippi also has a proud legacy of supporting DHS missions across multiple domains, from helicopters flown by the Coast Guard and the CBP to the national security cutters and future polar security cutters built in Pascagoula, Mississippi. So our state plays a central role in helping secure the homeland. But what I would like to highlight today is a wonderful program at Mississippi State University that supports DHS. And as you may be aware, DHS Justice Next Gen program at Mississippi State serves an incredibly valuable resource. And the primary mission of this is to serve the operational entities within DHS through research, development, testing, integration, and the evaluation of UAS, the unmanned aerial systems, and related technologies to that. But the Justice Program has credited MSU with a number of developments that have enhanced the technology and the efficiency for the operational components. So we're real proud of that. But as we look ahead, I hope that you will view justice as an important effort. And do you have any thoughts on these programs or similar programs?
Yeah, the Justice Program is very important and is being continued going forward. And we recognize the partnership that we've had with so many states in these projects. So that is something that the Department of Homeland Security is very willing and able in the future to partner with you.
Well, it takes so much to make these things successful, but we're really proud of that. And again, thank you for everything you're doing. You are doing an incredible job, and I am thrilled that you are there.
Thank you.
Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
On this committee and your tireless effort to get us back to regular order, moving these bills not only through full committee, but making sure that they're seen on the floor.
Yep.
Since January 20th, under President Trump's leadership, the department has actually become a priority. Rather than turning Border Patrol agents and ICE officers into paper pushers, President Trump has empowered the men and women of CBP and ICE. This has resulted in gaining more control on the border and the enforcement of our immigration laws. In fact, President Trump has signed a new law, the Laken Riley Act, which further empowers ICE to help protect communities from criminal aliens. He has taken swift and decisive actions in other areas, such as restoring the voice officers at ICE and reduce bureaucratic red tape that was counterproductive to achieving the mission. DHS has a vast, important, and complex mission. Its 250,000 employees are responsible for keeping Americans safe from coast to coast, on the water, and in the air. As chair of the Homeland Security Appropriations Subcommittee, it is my responsibility to work with you, Madam Secretary, and my fellow senators to appropriate the resources DHS needs to carry out its mission. One of the most important areas that we must dedicate resources to is border security and immigration enforcement. I want to say thank you to the brave men and women of Customs and Border Protection and Immigration and Customs Enforcement who show up every single day to keep our borders secure, to keep our communities safe, and to enforce our immigration laws. Since President Trump took back the White House, we have seen historically low levels of encounters along the southwest border. In March 2024, Border Patrol encountered 137,473 people. Fast forward to March of 2025, under President Trump's leadership, Border Patrol encountered only 7,181 people. That's a 95% decrease. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Under the Biden administration, there were nearly 2 million gotaways, and in 2023, the Chief of Border Patrol testified that gotaways may have been underreported by as much as 20%. The work that President Trump and this administration have done to curb the flow of illegal migration is truly incredible. We've gone from record high encounters under the previous administration to 2 consecutive months of record lows. Ultimately, that means safer communities and families across our great country. But we cannot let up. We must continue to empower Border Patrol. We want our agents on the line to be equipped with the best tools available. We must also continue the renewed focus on interior enforcement, where we have seen tremendous gains since President Trump took the oath of office. In fact, since President Trump's inauguration, there have been a 153% increase in removals stemming from ICE apprehensions, a true testament to the work done by DHS law enforcement officials that are working to safeguard our communities. As you know, Madam Secretary, the ultimate goal of immigration enforcement life cycle is to remove individuals that are here unlawfully, and I commend your department in the pursuit in the end of that goal. One of the results of our open border policies supported by the previous administration was significant growth in ICE's non-detained docket, growing from 3.7 million at the end of FY 2021 to 7.6 million at the end of 2024. That is a 105% increase. Many will commit crimes while here, waiting their turn to be processed, which is unacceptable and why I fought so hard for the Lake and Riley Act to pass Congress. And that is also why I was proud to be there when President Trump signed that into law. I am incredibly proud when you look at the work that Alabama does to support the Department of Homeland Security and the equities there and so many hardworking, dedicated public servants who show up every single day to fulfill that mission. From the incredible collaboration between DHS and our college programs on research, to the HIS National Academy in Huntsville, to the Coast Guard's Aviation Training Center in Mobile, it's gratifying to see that I represent a state that plays such an important role in protecting our country. Alabama is also home to some key institutions that fit within the administration's priorities of empowering state and local law enforcement to have a seat at the table when it comes to disaster recovery and national security. Both FEMA's Center for Domestic Preparedness and the National Computer Forensic Institute in Hoover provide key resources to local officials across our nation to ensure that they are equipped with the best knowledge, skills, and tools needed to protect and serve the United States of America. It is unfortunate that trainings have been canceled, especially at a time when cities across this country begin to prepare for the World Cup and the Olympics. Madam Secretary, I am certainly open to conversations about how all of this evolves, but I want to make sure that we are looking at future threats as well as existing threats, and I believe that we can do both. Another FEMA area that not only saves taxpayer dollars but saves taxpayer lives is the BRIC program. Since President Trump signed the Disaster Recovery Reform Act, which authorizes BRIC, nearly $5 billion has gone to mitigation projects across 55 states and territories and 37 tribal nations that requested funding. This is clearly a popular and important program. The program obviously is not without its challenges. Applying and implementing BRIC grants requires resources to many cities, states, and tribes that they may not have. But rather than ceasing to implement it, we should work together to identify ways that BRIC could be amended to be less complex and more efficient. Madam Secretary, the people up here look forward to working with you and your team. We look forward to conversations about the President's FY26 budget for DHS. From what I've seen, I am personally supportive of zeroing out the Shelter and Services Program, and I look forward to conversations about FEMA, CISA, and TSA. I hope that we will see requests for base increases to CBP, ICE, and elsewhere within DHS. You have an incredibly difficult job, Madam Secretary, and have stepped up to do it during one of the most challenging times. I want to thank you for your service, and I look forward to your testimony today and to working with you and your team to making sure that America's borders are safe and its people are secure. I now turn to Senator Murphy and recognize him for his opening remarks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I get cut off by the gentleman from Nevada, if I talk too long, no, I just wanted to extend an invitation to you, Madam Secretary, to come out to my district to visit the Spokane border sector as well as the Orville station and also inland Washington. But we have a Coast Guard navigation team in Kennewick. So, fantastic. As sharing border states. It would be a good thing for you to see. I just wanted to say one thing. The recent skinny budget proposed notable cuts to CISA, as you've heard many of my colleagues mention several times. I just wanted to mention that last summer and in March, I believe, CISA provided some farmers and ranchers in my district a briefing and training on protecting food from farm to table with cybersecurity and protective emphasis workshop. And I just wanted to encourage you to look at that. I think it was very well received, and I think it would be a good thing for a program to continue using. Let me ask about sanctuary jurisdictions. I believe state and local partnerships truly are important for the agents and the officers at DHS to execute their mission. How have sanctuary jurisdictions or state or municipal governments hindered the agency's mission to protect the homeland?
Well, I would say every day it is thwarting our efforts to be able to go out and help make our communities safe and secure. There have been times where we've gone out and targeted bad actors and criminals in communities that are guilty of rape, murder, violence, domestic abuse, drug trafficking, human trafficking. And when we've gone in to do those operations, we have not had the backup of local law enforcement. We've not able to have leaders that have walked alongside of us in support of securing their communities and been there for ICE agents that are out there putting their lives on the line to help secure and get these bad criminals off their streets. And those individuals are protecting them with their decisions, their political rhetoric. They're also filing lawsuits against us and the authorities that we're exercising to try to jam us up in court rather than giving us the opportunity to go out there and really follow through on what our commitment has been to this country. So the sanctuary jurisdictions have been fighting this administration in trying to do what the American people asked President Trump to do in November, and that was to make their communities safe again. I will tell you that when I've been out on the front lines with many of these agents, when they've been doing operations in the early morning sweeping up criminals, they are doing the hard work, and many times in partnership with local law enforcement in cities. So we appreciate that partnership and where we can get it. In sanctuary cities, it becomes much more of an operation that has to have more people. We have to commit more ICE agents, more federal officers there because the local community has not, and the leadership there has not been supportive. And then also, I would say it makes it more dangerous. We have seen violence against our ICE officers go up over 300%. And I think that's because of the rhetoric out there by local mayors and governors who have, put out misinformation and perpetuated lies about law enforcement and what they're trying to do to help communities. I remember the morning I was in New York City, we were conducting ICE operations on known criminals that were guilty of violent abuses and breaking the law, we had community members that were walking by on the street that were taking their kids to school, and when they would walk by, they would say, "Thank you. Thank you for being here."
says
Yet
a
their
lot.
leadership
Says a lot.
was not there to support and back up our operations. So I would ask people in these communities to challenge their mayors, challenge their governors to come to the table and to help us, because I don't know of anybody who wanted to raise their kids in a community that was filled with criminals, where it wasn't safe to go out at night and where they couldn't walk their kids to school and not have to worry about if they were going to get there safely.
Thank you. I'm going to switch topics really quick in the short amount of time we have left. Tariffs.
Yes.
We both come from agricultural states. I fully recognize the importance of tariffs to help level the playing field and provide a fair opportunity for our producers to compete on world market. But I also remember in 2018 retaliatory tariffs on agricultural products, which felt the brunt of those efforts. Could you talk just a little bit, if I could, without putting you, it's not a gotcha question, but I just wanted to express the concern that agriculture doesn't need any more challenges right now. Could you talk a little bit about some of the conversations maybe that you're having at the executive level about retaliation?
Yeah, thank you for that. I've worked on food policy for 30 years. So I not only am a farmer and a rancher, but I immediately started working on state and federal programs, and I recognized that our food policy in this country is a national security issue. And keeping farmers out on the land, producing our food, is imperative to making sure that we can feed ourselves. And another country doesn't control us by controlling our food supply. So President Trump recognizes this, and we've spoken for hours about the importance of having farmers here in this country growing our food and having many farmers, not allowing just one or two big companies or conglomerates control that supply, because it makes food affordable and available to every single American. The President Trump, if you remember back during that period of time, was there for farmers. He helped them with assistance when those retaliatory tariffs came into place. And he recognizes that this negotiation that we're having now with these countries has to happen to level the playing field. We've been treated unfairly in trade agreements for many, many years. When I was in Congress, I served on the Ways and Means Committee, which many people refer to as the committee that has the most ways it can be mean, because it has taxes and trade and tariffs and all the different jurisdictions as far as what can happen. But I would say specifically, working on trade agreements while I was there, I recognized how we could come to a trade agreement and facilitate that. But then we also would, as soon as our shipments of soybeans hit the shores of China, they would reject it for different sanctions or regulations such as sanitary or phytosanitary reasons, and would manipulate how they interpreted those agreements and didn't adhere to them anyways. So President Trump is all in to make sure that we rectify the wrongs of the past and make sure that we're treated fairly and get our jobs back home here in America. So far, CBP has collected over $32 billion worth of tariffs since April 2nd has gone into place. And they've adjusted and done that, and these countries are feeling the pain enough that they're coming to the table and having negotiations with this administration to make sure that we're treated fairly and our farmers and ranchers are treated fairly in the future.
Appreciate that. Mr. Chairman, I will yield back.
Sorry.
Madam Secretary.
No need to be sorry, Madam Secretary.
Maybe.
Madam Secretary, welcome. Thank you for your service. I think you've probably seen this chart.
Yes.
Why don't you bring it a little bit closer here? For the first time, I've brought this chart and it's showing good news. For the previous 4 years, it described a disaster, a catastrophe, a clear and present danger to this country. And one of the reasons I want to point it up here is to point out how we were lied to during that entire 4-year period by the administration, reinforced by our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, saying we had to have Congress act. You know, we needed legislation. Right. But the fact of the matter is, no, we just need a new president. We need President Trump. Now, I would have been happy to pass a bill to reinforce President Biden's authority to secure the border, but he didn't want to. I think what's clear about this chart is you can see when President Biden was considering re-election, he realized the catastrophe at hand was becoming politically unpopular, and so he used the executive authority that President Trump had used to secure the border in his first term, and he started actually making progress on that. So again, it's just important the American people understand that for 4 years, The Biden administration, reinforced by the folks on the other side of the aisle, lied, bold face that President Biden didn't have the authority to secure the border. He wanted an open border. That's exactly what he got. Now, the question I have for you off this chart is, in his first term, took President Trump about 12 months to go from his peak of almost 5,000 encounters per day to a little over 500. You know, remain in Mexico, the agreements he had with the third countries, that type of thing. How could he do it so swiftly this time? This is literally a matter of months. In February is 418 encounters per day on average. In March is 355. And this is stunning success. I just kind of want to get your reaction in terms of how he accomplished it, how you guys accomplished this.
You know, I would say, Senator, that the president used not only the laws that were already on the books and started enforcing them, he also made sure that he talked about it and messaged it. Throughout the campaign, he talked about the need for a secure border. What we need to remember constantly in this country is that the world listens to everything that we say and what our leaders say. And he told me specifically when he nominated me for this position, I don't want you just to go and run the Department of Homeland Security, secure the border, and make sure that our agencies are back on mission. I want you to tell the world what we're doing, because the only way they're going to stop coming to this country is if they know never to leave their home country. If they know that we're enforcing our laws, they will stop coming. And that's exactly what's happening. Because of our messaging, because of the fact that we have actively talked in Guatemala, in Honduras, in Mexico about don't come to the United States anymore illegally. There will be consequences. They have stayed there. In fact, we're showing now in the Darien Gap that it's reverse migration, that people that got to Mexico never even made it to the border. Now they're turning around and going back home. When I was in Mexico visiting with the president there and with government leaders, she said, specifically, they think there could be 500 to 600,000 people that just stopped in Mexico that turned around that were never even countered that reached our border. I think that's why in March you saw less than 200 encounters a day, and it was a historic low for this country in encounters, and it was because not only did he enforce the laws and show there would be consequences if you broke our laws, which is what our country was built on, he also made sure that we talked to the American people about why we were doing it, that it was for our safety and for our future, and that also to these other countries that it was no longer going to be the status quo of Joe Biden.
And of course, that's a sea change the Biden administration welcomed. I mean, they encouraged, they incentivized people to come here. So this is a budget hearing. I do want to ask. In the first Trump administration, I have best information. We built something like 458 miles of walls. Cost about $6.6 billion, about $14 million per mile. Your budgetary request right now is for $46.5 billion, a lot more. That would, at the same price, build something more than 3,000 miles. So can you kind of square that circle, or circle that square, whatever? Can you explain exactly what are you asking for in that $46.5 billion? Why is the request so high when we were able to build so many miles in the first term for a lot less?
Well, today the estimates are that building steel bollard wall will be over $12 million a mile, is what they're estimating. We have built about 70 miles of wall since the president has been in place, but that's been a mixture of permanent steel versus temporary versus a little bit of buoy barrier where it's appropriate that are waterborne.
So again, the 12 million is less than the 14 million I had calculated. That would be way more than 3,000 miles. Are you really planning on building 3,000 miles?
The problem that we have at the border right now is that we have CBP cameras and towers that don't work. We have some authorities there with the FAA on infrastructure that helps us do surveillance of areas where there isn't a wall that is not even operational. I would say 1 out of 3 actually are functioning today, which makes the individuals that are there work even harder. And we know that we talk about gotaways and what happens today. The truth is that there's portions of this border that we still don't necessarily know what happens there 24/7. So we need.
We're $37 trillion in debt. I'm just going to ask that you and the department sharpen your pencil on that wall request. I think it's more than you need. Okay. Again, I'm happy to provide the support you need to secure the border, do the deportations, but we need to be very concerned about how much we're spending, and it needs to all be justified. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Hassan.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Governor, for being here and for testifying before this committee, and for your service, not just to your state, but to America. 9 years ago, today. We met in probably the coldest day I've ever been in my life in Iowa.
Yes,
as you and I were making phone calls and whipping up votes for Republicans in Iowa. My wife, Bridget, who's here, got a chance to meet you. And we left Iowa saying, that person's really going to go far. And here we are 9 years later. You've been an amazing governor, amazing congresswoman, and now you're going to make an even better Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. So I think sometimes in D.C. we tend to complicate things. There is a current Secretary of Homeland Security. So why don't we take this opportunity to do a little job review and compare and contrast him to you. So just if you don't mind, I'll ask you some questions and you can give me an answer. Secretary Mayorkas allowed about, you said it, just about 400 people on a terror watch list to come into this country illegally. If you were confirmed as Secretary of Homeland Security, how many people on the terror watch list would you allow into this country?
Well, Senator, we would work every single day until we had that number was zero. And if you look at the previous Trump administration over his entire 4 years, in comparison to Joe Biden's number, President Trump, it was 11 that were then removed from the country and faced consequences. When you look at the 382 that Joe Biden has let in and the policies continue, is shocking and needs to be changed immediately.
Mayorkas let in about 12,000 murderers. How many would you target to let into this country?
My goal every day would be to have no murderers allowed into this country and our communities.
Mayorkas allowed 16,000 rapists. How many would you target to let in?
Every day I'd work to make sure that there was none let into this country.
He let 600,000, Mayorkas, 600,000 people with criminal convictions. How many would you allow in?
We would work every day to make sure people are safe and that those with criminal convictions are immediately removed.
How many private jets would you have the United States taxpayers have fly into foreign countries to pick up people to bring them here?
Yeah, Senator, we will no longer be undertaking that mission at the Department of Homeland Security.
So not 700,000 individuals on private jets over the last 4 years. You would not have any.
No. I'll be working with President Trump to put in place his agenda in adherence to our federal laws.
And how many illegals will you plan to house in luxury hotel rooms in Manhattan at a cost of $6,000 per month?
Sir, clearly, Senator, during this election, the American people said they did not support that and that that would not be a part of this new administration.
How about sex change operations for illegals? How many of those would you suspect you would fund?
Senator, I believe that the Department of Homeland Security will be reevaluating its mission in this country to not allow that going forward under President Trump's goals.
And if you had an illegal migrant that was in this country and they committed a crime, would you offer them airfare from one state to another to evade law enforcement?
Sir, I will be following this nation's laws and the Constitution and make sure that all laws are adhered to.
And if you had been the head of the Department of Homeland Security a year or so ago, would you have closed a detention center in Georgia that would have allowed the release of somebody charged with a crime?
Sir, I don't have the specifics to that situation, but certainly that would not be something that I would want to have under my watch.
So just to be clear, Lakem Riley would be alive today if you had been the Secretary of Homeland Security.
Senator, my hope is that that would be true, yes.
Let's switch to another part of the disgraceful immigration laws that Biden and Mayorkas, who objectively, by the way, objectively has been the worst cabinet member ever in the history of the United States of America. Let's talk about temporary protective status. Temporary being the operative word. Mayorkas and Biden just extended temporary protective status again through 2027. Will you continue to corrupt TPS to allow some sort of open borders agenda? And will you use hot weather of 80 degrees and sunny beaches in El Salvador as a reason why people have to stay in America and not safely return?
Yeah, Senator, this program has been abused and manipulated by the Biden administration, and that will no longer be allowed to allow that and these extensions going forward the way that they are. The program was intended to be temporary, and this extension of over 600,000 Venezuelans as well is alarming when you look at what we've seen in different states, including Colorado, with gangs doing damage and harming the individuals and the people that live there.
And in terms of our border, like the physical border, I've been there many times, you've been there many times. Who should be in charge? Who should have operational control of our border? The United States government or the Mexican drug cartels?
Oh, Senator, the United States needs to control our borders and secure them.
So if this were a job interview in the private sector, and you had somebody like Alejandro Mayorkas in charge, and we had the opportunity to upgrade to you, this would be the greatest upgrade in history of the United States of America. But I'm going to end my time with a startling statistic and actually a challenge to the Democrat Party. When Mayorkas was confirmed, every single Democrat voted to confirm him. And 6 Republicans joined all 50 Democrats in that confirmation. If we get to the vote, and hopefully, Chairman, we could do that Monday, because we cannot wait one single day without you being in charge of that department. We should have 100%, 100 senators vote for your confirmation. This will be the litmus test, in my mind, as to whether we have a Democrat Party that's actually serious about doing bipartisan things like securing this country and protecting our citizens. Any Democrat that voted for Mayorkas that does not vote for you should be in front of their voters and removed from office. Thank you for serving, Brian. Thank you for being here, for putting up with the nonsense that you guys have had to put up with over the years. You are going to make an amazing Secretary of Homeland Security. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Slotkin.
Back.
Time has expired. Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Noem, good to see you. Welcome. Congratulations on securing the border in a record amount of time. The last administration came and sat where you're sitting for 4 years and told us it couldn't be done. It couldn't be done. The border was just an intractable problem. It would take years to do it. You did it in the space of really 30 days, and now the United States southern border is secure. So thank you for your tremendous work on that. I want to begin, however, with the situation in St. Louis, which I'm sure you're aware of. On Friday afternoon and evening, major storms ripped through the St. Louis area, as well as southeast Missouri. I'm going to put a picture up over my shoulder here. An F3 tornado cut right through North St. Louis. This is what you're seeing here is pretty typical, I'm sad to say, of the damage. We lost 5 people in St. Louis. We lost another 2 in Scott County, which is down in southeast Missouri, there to the south, a couple of hours south of the city. I spent much of the day yesterday just walking these neighborhoods and talking to residents, and this that you're seeing over my shoulder is what these neighborhoods all look like. These are areas that families have lived here. In some cases, I talked to one individual, one gentleman, and he said that his family had been there since his great-grandmother came to that neighborhood in 1919. So it's that kind of a community, and they are totally devastated. Yesterday afternoon, my governor requested an emergency disaster declaration to expedite FEMA funds to help the state just clean up. I mean, just clean up the kind of rubble now that you're seeing behind me. You've been a governor until very recently. You know how important this is. Can we get your help to expedite the consideration of that request? Again, it was just made yesterday. We need it as quickly as possible. Will you help us expedite that?
Yeah, absolutely. I've spoken with your governor and did that day that this devastation happened. And so we've promised and pledged to get that expedited as soon as possible for him so he can have the resources that he needs to respond to his people. And that's one of the failures that FEMA's had in the past, is that people that incur this kind of damage and lose everything, then they sit there for months, sometimes years, and never get the promised critical response that they think or that they believe they should be getting from the federal government. And that's why President Trump believes that this agency needs to be dramatically reformed.
I'm glad to hear you say that, and you're exactly right. We've had the situation in Missouri in years past where we've had individuals who have qualified for FEMA aid, including individual assistance. In some cases, they've been awarded the assistance,
right,
and then FEMA has come in and clawed it back, right, or never paid it out, or never sent teams to help. So to have your commitment to expedite this is tremendous. That will be welcome news to the residents of St. Louis. We also have the state has pending 3 requests for major disaster declarations from earlier storms. We've lost over a dozen people. Well, actually, if you count the folks we lost just on Friday, we've lost almost 20 people now in major storms just in the last 2 months in Missouri. It's been a terrible spring for us. Here again, can I ask for your help? Will you commit to helping for those 3 major disaster declaration requests that are pending? Will you help expedite those, Secretary Noem, and get those in front of the president, get those approved? We are desperate for the assistance in Missouri.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank
Make
you.
sure the application gets to the White House as soon as possible.
Fantastic, thank you. And can I also have your commitment that if and when the president approves a major disaster declaration for this storm that just happened on Friday in St. Louis, will you expedite as much as possible FEMA individual assistance for those who qualify for it in the St. Louis area?
Yes.
And I want to tell you just how important that is, because as I toured these streets and walked and talked to the residents, what I heard over and over is many of these folks don't have insurance.
Yeah.
You know, many of these folks, they either got their homes from a family member, or they bought them from a family member, so they don't have a mortgage on the property, and therefore they don't have homeowners insurance. So, as you know, having been a governor, in many instances, FEMA assistance is going to be the only assistance that they're going to get. And I just had a hearing in this committee and our subcommittee, Senator Kim and I, last week, where we talked to major insurance companies who routinely scam people by refusing to pay out the full policy awards that they are due. So I know we're going to be fighting that in Missouri. We've got to have the federal government where there's individual assistance that people qualify for. We've got to have people be able to get that. Otherwise, we're never going to be able to rebuild these neighborhoods. So you just committed, I think, to expediting that. I appreciate that. Thank you for your help in all of this. And then the last thing we'll say is can you commit also to making sure that the FEMA communication with the state and with individuals is open, is clear, is transparent? You referenced the fact that FEMA is notorious for giving bad information, for slow-walking residents, for confusing intake forms that nobody knows how to fill out, for not getting back to people. Can you commit to, as we deal with this disaster in St. Louis and others around the state, that under your leadership, FEMA is going to act with expedition, they are going to be clear in their communications, and they're going to follow up and give people the awards that they need if they qualify for it?
Yeah, that's been the biggest challenge of FEMA in the past, is just the delayed response. People are counting on the assistance and it never comes through. And the paperwork is too complicated for an individual many times to complete on their own. They need help and assistance. So that's part of the reforms that the FEMA Review Council will be undertaking. And we've got people that are frontline responders across the country that are serving on that council. And we'll take your insight as well. But we'll continue to expedite what we can with the framework we have in front of us, but do better diligence than the last administration on how we take care of people.
Fantastic. Everything you said today is going to be very, very welcome news in St. Louis and the rest of Missouri this morning. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your service. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Senator Fetterman.
Well, I need a little help from a chair that respects the members of the committee. I'm sorry, Madam Chair. This is...
You pretty much secured the southern border, haven't you?
Yes, sir. The CBP,
and
that
upsets some of my colleagues, doesn't it? They say you've done it the wrong way, haven't they? Could you answer that?
Yes, sir. They do say that.
Do you think they're upset because you supposedly did it the wrong way, or you think they're upset that you did it at all?
I think they're upset that by President Trump enforcing the law, it happened so quickly and successfully.
Yeah. Now, when President Biden came into office, the first thing he did was get rid of all of the things we were doing to stop people from coming into our country illegally, didn't he?
Yes.
I mean, it was like The Price is Right. Come on down. Except he said, come on in. And most of my Democratic colleagues went along with that, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
In fact, they cheered him on, didn't they? Is that a yes?
Yes, sir.
How many people do you think President Biden let into our country illegally? Just give me a ballpark figure.
Sir, we don't know for certain, but we believe it could be upwards to 20 million people that are illegally in this country.
So that's like adding 10 Nebraskas to our country, isn't it?
That's correct.
Why do you think President Biden and my Democratic colleagues did that? Do you think they believe in open borders?
I think they believed in open borders and letting people come into this country that would affect our society and criminals. Those other countries emptying out the worst of the worst, their mental institutions, their prisons came in here and jeopardized, and known terrorists.
Well, only one or two circumstances are possible, it seems to me. Either President Biden and the Democrats who supported him believe in open borders, or the people that President Biden put in charge of securing the border, you wouldn't trust to run a snowball stand, right?
That is correct.
So nobody is that incompetent. So it has to be, they just believe in open borders, do they not?
Yes, because I know the people who were securing the border and they weren't allowed to do their job.
Do you think they believe that vetting people at the border is racist?
Yes, I do. I think by the way they allowed people in and granted them immediate parole status.
Do you think that President Biden and some of my Democratic colleagues, I don't want to paint with too broad a brush, Madam Secretary, thought of these foreign nationals in our country illegally as potential new voters?
I do, sir.
Okay. If you're an ordinary American and you oppose illegal immigration, but you support legal immigration, does that make you a racist?
No, sir. No, sir, not at all. It just means that you believe there should be a rule of law, and that's what America was built on.
And that's what you've been enforcing, right?
Exactly. We have been following the Constitution and the rule of law in this country.
And I want to be sure I understand, because there's been a lot of confusing testimony here. You've secured the border, have you not?
This administration has, yes, sir.
And some of my colleagues are upset with you.
Yes, sir.
And they say you did it wrong.
Yes, sir.
And do you agree with me that what they're really upset about is that you did it at all?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I want to ask you a last question about our federal judiciary. I've said repeatedly that all of us has a moral and a civic obligation to follow federal orders, and I stand by that. But there have been a lot of national injunctions, universal injunctions issued to try to stop you from doing your job. Where were these judges when people were breaking the law and coming into our country illegally? Were any of them speaking up and issuing national injunctions against the Democrats?
I don't believe I can be specific about every single judge, but these judges that now are trying to stop us from enforcing our laws, I don't believe or recall them
Can you
being
think,
vocal then.
Madam Secretary, of one single solitary federal judge who, when President Biden and my Democratic colleagues, not all of them, but many of them.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Secretary or Senator Murray went on over about 2 minutes, so I'm going to take a minute.
Senator Van Hollen just got shut down.
Yes,
right
if
on
you
the
can,
zeros.
if you can finish your question.
Can you recall one single solitary federal judge when President Biden and my Democratic colleagues were letting 20 million people come into the country illegally?
I don't recall.
Can you think of
Thank
one
you.
single solitary judge
you.
that issued a national injunction
more than
to
one
stop
question.
them?
No, I can't recall one.
I can't either. If there weren't
you,
for
Senator
double
Kennedy.
standards
Madam
around
Chair,
here,
Madam
there
And
wouldn't
so
be any
Senator Peters.
standards at all, Madam Secretary.
Thank you.
Committee
Thank
down
you,
there.
Senator Kennedy.
I'd-
Senator Peters.
Madam, let me just say, let's apply the rules fairly. Senator Van Hollen was asking tough questions, but was shut down pretty immediately when his time was expired. Can we at least have a commitment, Madam Chair, that senators on this committee will be allowed to submit questions for the record,
Absolutely.
and that you will
Yes.
Absolutely.
ask the secretary to answer those questions?
I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Strong, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Noem, thank you for aiding President Trump in securing our border after years of negligence and mismanagement. No new laws were needed. New leadership was the only piece of the puzzle missing. I'd also like to thank the hardworking men and women of DHS for their tireless dedication to safeguarding our nation. Last week, I spoke to the FBI Director Patel about a recent visit he had to Huntsville, Alabama and Redstone Arsenal. We discussed the cost-effective location, distinct partnership opportunities, high quality of life for personnel, the remarkable talent pool, and available room to grow. As you may know, I'm proud to host HSI XCOM South and the National Academy for Advanced Training and Leadership in my district, along with many companies and organizations that support DHS. I'd like to invite you to come see for yourself the phenomenal work occurring in North Alabama. Secretary Noem, I'm curious, are there plans to move DHS personnel and programs out of the Beltway and closer to the citizens they serve?
Well, thank you for the question, Congressman. Currently, there aren't plans to move agencies or components outside of their offices, although we do believe that we need to be accountable to taxpayers and are evaluating every single mission set that each agency is tasked with and the individuals, how they are fulfilling it. So that is areas where you'll see reflected in our reconciliation ask and in our fiscal year 26 budget request. That reflects where those needs are, but also our ability to reprogram dollars that where the department got off mission and was perpetuating activities that were not a part of Homeland Security's reason for why it was created.
Thank you. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention my role as chairman of the Emergency Management and Technology Subcommittee, and I want to thank you for meeting with us in New Orleans. You made your schedule available to meet that committee right after you were confirmed, and we really appreciate that. As you can imagine, I have an interest in the work of FEMA Review Council and was pleased to see the announcement of 13 new members. Secretary Noem, the President's executive order said the council would have up to 20 members. Will additional members be added, and how are you coordinating with the White House on the council?
Yes, absolutely. There is the potential for new members to be added, and that is a current evaluation that's ongoing with me and my team and the White House as well. So if you have recommendations, we certainly would continue to receive those.
Thank you. We're excited about those recommendations. What do you anticipate the priorities of the council will be, and how can we support that work?
Well, the priorities of the council is to evaluate FEMA as it stands today and how it can better be reformed and replaced to respond to people's needs in a time of crisis. What we can do to strengthen states, to give them more tools and resources to take care of their people and empower them to make decisions in a critical response period. Many times you've seen over the years where the federal government has not shown up when they were expected to, and then even after a crisis was over, had committed to being there to help people restructure and to rebuild and never followed through on it. We still have claims outstanding in FEMA from Hurricane Katrina, wildfire claims from out west that are 10 years old, where people said, we have this claim, this lost, FEMA committed to pay it and still has not followed through on that. We saw political targeting that happened in North Carolina where individuals within FEMA decided who could get help and who didn't get help. So that needs to end, and this needs some integrity to it and making sure the federal government's there for support, but the states are empowered to do the emergency response is very important to President Trump.
That support was determined based on the political sign they had in the front yards of their home.
That is correct.
And that's totally unacceptable. Switching gears, I'd also like to highlight the great work of CISA to protect our infrastructure and mass gathering events. Their training and exercises help states and localities respond quickly and effectively to evolving threats. In Huntsville, Alabama, collaboration among the FBI, ATF, CISA Office for Bombing Prevention represents a national hub of expertise focused on countering bomb threats and the use of explosives by adversaries. Secretary Noem, can you speak to how CISA is working with interagency partners to secure infrastructure, particularly ahead of the World Cup and Olympics?
Yeah, CISA is the federal cybersecurity agency. It is the priority point for all agencies to interact with and their connections to state and local governments. And many times CISA got siloed, and our CIA, FBI, intelligence agencies were siloed and not sharing information. So we're building out a cooperation that has never existed before, and where we're bringing them to the table, sharing information that we may have as far as vulnerabilities, but also in how we can partner with private industry. The fact of the matter is that's a resource that was neglected for much too long. And so bringing private industry to the table to tell us and help us go out there and find those bad actors, oftentimes they know, but they don't have a protection of letting us know without some kind of liability that they expose themselves to. So we're committed to building those kinds of partnerships so that they can flag threats to us without worried about retribution from those bad actors into their own companies.
Secretary Noem, it's an honor to have you before us today. We'll see you in Alabama soon. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, the chair.
The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Iowa, Mrs. Henson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Madam Secretary. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your commitment to getting Homeland Security back to mission. You know, we saw such a straying from that in the previous administration, and President Trump's border security promises were really delivered on day one and continue to be executed on. So I just want to say thank you for that. Under your leadership, those illegal encounters at our southern border are dropping to historic lows. Our immigration laws are finally being enforced. The border wall is back under construction. DHS is finally working again on protecting the homeland. No new laws, but we have a new president and a new secretary, so I want to say thank you. Last year, before this committee, Secretary Mayorkas at the time came before us pushing the Biden administration's $4.7 billion Southwest Border Contingency Fund. All that really was a slush fund, we know, designed to bypass Congress and bankroll those failed policies and sanctuary cities doing their bidding. He claimed it was to manage surges, but those surges were of their own doing, sending a clear signal to illegal immigrants, the traffickers, the cartels, that our border was open for business for them. That wasn't enforcement, that was actual chaos at our southern border by the taxpayers' dime. So I see that as just one of the many blatant attempts for Secretary Mayorkas at the time and President Biden to misuse those taxpayer dollars intentionally without accountability. But again, under President Trump and your leadership, we have reversed course there. Programs like the Shelter and Services Program that enabled that abuse have been gutted, and their funding is now going to real border enforcement. So I'd like to drill down a little bit, Madam Secretary, on the misuse of those dollars under the last administration. Can you walk us through some of the specific programs or activities under the Biden administration that enabled this crisis and how you've worked to unwind those programs?
Well, it was the Shelter and Services Program, which you referenced specifically. Those dollars were taken and manipulated to facilitate illegal activity and housing for illegal aliens and criminals that were in this country, and gave them a place to set up shop and to conduct their trafficking, their drug dealing, and also their crimes against their communities that they live in. A prime example is the Roosevelt Hotel in New York City. Filled with hundreds and hundreds of illegal aliens, many of them criminals, part of foreign terrorist organizations such as TDA, and in fact, Laken Riley's killer stayed there, and paid for by the American taxpayer, courtesy of Joe Biden, and those who supported him and his leadership in this country. That's what we're working to address, is to make sure that those dollars are no longer continue to be used in such a manner, and that programs like that have been misused are used for ways that secure this country and really follow through on what the mission of the Department of Homeland Security is. And that's to keep the American homeland safe and secure and to protect our communities. We have many of the grants and different dollars that we have out there being reevaluated. We're also utilizing several different programs and working with other different cabinet secretaries to make sure that our housing programs, our food assistance programs, our shelter services programs, even programs within other agencies, that if people are illegals and that it wasn't the authority of Congress and never the determining decision by Congress to make them be people who took advantage of those programs or to have access to them, that was ended. That no longer was this president going to allow money to be diverted different than what was authorized to be utilized to facilitate people who are in this country illegally and breaking our laws.
And you mentioned the number on the terror watch list already held accountable, 250, and we know there are more, and I think that Americans need to understand you are doing that work to help keep us safe, apprehend these dangerous people that were just let to roam free in our country. I certainly, as a Midwest mom, like you, understand that we need to prioritize that and make sure you have the resources necessary for detention beds as well as the enforcement side. So as we work through fiscal year 26, the considerations that we need to be taking a look at and reconciliation as well, what additional authorities or potential congressional actions do you see as necessary to making sure you can execute on your mission?
You know, I would say the Department of Homeland Security is one of the largest agencies in the federal government, but has one of the smallest budgets. And it really is about when you look at what you're doing for fiscal year 26, and when you're looking at the reconciliation package, is to really determine where your priorities are, where Congress's priorities are. What is the responsibility of the federal government? What did our founders task us with as far as ensuring for the American people, and what rights did he remain with the people and with the state? And every decision that gets made here should be facilitated through that lens to make sure we're spending money appropriately. I always say, and have said for many, many years, no matter what topic comes up, what program, what agency, there's always going to be lobbyists who show up. There's very few people who show up in the room to lobby for the American taxpayer. And the job that you do in oversight is incredibly important. And I come to this role today not only as a wife and a mom and a grandma, but also as a business owner, someone who's been an employee for many different people, served in Congress, served in our legislature, but also as governor. And people need leadership that recognizes what the priorities are. And so every different component that I have under my responsibility, we are putting back on mission and making sure that they are fulfilling the duties to which they were created. So thank you for considering the reconciliation package. It will be considering the amount of people that are in this country illegally, many of them perpetuating crimes. We need the resources to continue doing what President Trump has promised the American people, to get these individuals out of our country and make sure that they come into our country, if they self-deport, when they come back, that they do so the right way, and that they can be a part of the American dream in the future.
Thank you again to you and President Trump for redirecting those resources where they are intended to go. Really appreciate that. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The floor belongs to the gentleman from Washington State, Mr. Newhouse, for your questions.
Well, thank you, the gentleman from Nevada and the lady from Illinois as well. Thank you, Secretary Noem, for being here with us to discuss. This is our agency, the Homeland Security. I want to focus on a couple things that I've spent a lot of time working on, and when you were in the House, you did too, and I want to thank you for that. That has to do with agricultural labor. I was very delighted to hear President Trump in early April make several, and I thought were very important comments about the agricultural labor force, as well as some of the, what would you call, hotel, entertainment kind of workers whose current workforce certainly are lack a legal status. So I'm talking about H-2A and H-2B. He proposed a plan to allow undocumented agricultural workers an opportunity to touch back with the ability to come back to the United States with achieving a legal status. I can't overestimate or overstate the importance, as you know, of an agricultural labor force to produce food and fiber in our country. So I wanted you to, if you could, provide any kind of an update that you could share with us on the discussions there at the cabinet level. But also, in that same vein, a major cattle producer and processor in Washington and Idaho recently shared some of their concerns with the, I believe it's called the termination of parole process for Cubans, Haitians, Venezuelans, and Nicaraguans. Apparently, the workforce there, up to 15% of their workforce is made up of people from those countries. And so I wanted to give you an opportunity to either speak with us about that or follow up with my staff later.
No, thank you so much for talking about the important programs that we have to facilitate a workforce in this country that have contributed so much in certain industries in different areas going forward. President Trump has been very clear that he believes that people that are here illegally need to go home. He has backed that up with his policies that you don't get to come into this country and have the law apply to some people and not others, that the scales of justice should apply equally to everyone, and that individuals who are here illegally need to face consequences for that and go home. I think one of the reasons that you've heard us recently talk about self-deportation is because our preference is that the individuals who are here illegally self-deport. We will facilitate purchasing their plane ticket and a stipend once they return to their home country, so they have the opportunity to do exactly what you talked about by touchback. They have the opportunity to come back to America then and to do it the right way. They will face the consequences for breaking our laws originally, but we want everybody to have the opportunity to be a part of the American dream. If individuals who are here illegally wait until we have to go out and find them, arrest them, deport them, spend up to $17,000 by getting them back home to their home countries, President Trump has been very clear. They will never get the chance to come back. So I would encourage everyone in this country that is in these industries to proactively tell the story. That's why you've seen us aggressively carrying the message to people that the United States is now following the law, that we are now securing our borders, and that we're getting people out of our country who've broken our laws. But if you do work with us, that you will have the opportunity to come back. Those visa programs are ones that we continue to have discussions with the administration, with many of you on. There's some latitude given to the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, but I will remind you that Congress consistently maintains the authority to determine how many are issued in this country and if they are issued into the future. And so we always will follow that as that goes forward. And as you talk about the importance of what the work we do at the Department of Homeland Security, I know that working with these folks that are in these different industries, that we will continue to have those conversations with all of you. When we talk about different policies that the department is following, many times it's Congress, it's the House of Representatives and Senate who sets the policy that we are following and gives us the authority to do and take the actions that we are.
Okay, very good. Look forward to working with you more on that. And just in the short amount of time I have left, the harbor maintenance tax.
Yes.
A lot of countries are essentially bypassing that, bringing goods, importing them to the United States through either Canada or Mexico, and foregoing paying any kind of tax that way. Certainly we have a lot of illicit drugs coming through. We need to get a handle on that as well. But in your testimony, you highlighted the importance of the CBP enforcing tariffs on imports, and this seems to be an appropriate place to put a lot of time and energy. I'm going to, just so you know, I'll have some legislation here shortly addressing this kind of stuff, but I wanted to draw your attention to a lot of the efforts that other countries are going through to avoid paying that tax.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out and for talking about it in this committee hearing, because I think a lot of people don't realize that that's one of the factors that we're dealing with too at the federal level, is having other countries unfairly manipulate their processes to avoid paying what is due to the American people. Since President Trump has been in office, CBP has made 21 different enforcement actions on tariffs. So they've put in place that many adjustments and changes to other countries as goods and services come into this country, and have done it with excellence. I'll remind everybody that CBP is the oldest law enforcement agency in the country and has collected tariffs for many, many, many years. And so they have adjusted and done well with President Trump negotiating with these countries to finally treat our consumers and our country fairly when we've been so mistreated in trade agreements in the past.
Well, thank you.
But that is a part of the discussion that the president continues to have with these other entities that have manipulated that.
Very much appreciated. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Capito.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member, and it's great to see you, Secretary Noem, and it was a pleasure to serve with you in the House for so many years. I just want to make a statement in the beginning, because this chart, which you can't see, but many of us have seen, the blue lines being the number of people that were coming across the border during the Biden administration, and then the red is what you and the President have done over the last 3 months. I say congratulations. Results speak loudly. Not only are migrant encounters down 95%, but the gotaways are down 99%. To put it simply, migrants are just not slipping through. They're not evading our border patrol. I boil it down to two basic strategies that the administration has done that the previous administration could have done but totally ignored. One is deterrence. When possible illegals look to the United States and see that we are following through on deportation orders in larger numbers, I think that's a huge deterrence, along with other things that are occurring. The other one is enforcement of the law. You already just said that. So is there anything else you would add specifically, very shortly, that you can attribute this dramatic drop? You're being accused of breaking the law, and that's the reason the numbers are down. I personally don't believe that.
Well, I think having a strong leader in the White House that says we will enforce our laws in this country has worldwide effects. In fact, in where I have traveled to countries in El Salvador, Mexico, and Colombia, their leaders and their governments said, when you talk about the fact that you are now enforcing the laws in America, when your president talks about it, when we see these ads that are running in our country saying, if you want to come to the country and America illegally, don't come. Come the legal way, do the right way. We are now enforcing our laws. They say it has an overwhelming effect. In fact, in Mexico, some government officials, when I was there visiting with them and the president, said that they believe 500 to 600,000 people just in Mexico turned around before they ever got to our border in the last 3 months, because they got the message clearly when they were on their way. They heard that and they went back home. Also, I would say Border Patrol is thrilled. They get to finally do their jobs.
Right.
They get to finally, the morale has never been better. Recruitment is fantastic. ICE is recruiting. CBP's up 54%. I'd say the Coast Guard is up over 100% in recruitment, and the Secret Service is up over 200%. So the fact that they have an administration that's letting them do their jobs again and actually following the law is something they're very proud of. And so I think those two things are really what's making them proud.
Okay, you and I talked about this on the phone because of the drug scourge, the non-intrusive inspection, which is a lot of the technologies that can detect in large, when semis are coming through, there's a whole lot coming through the border, and we want to continue that free flow of goods. Where are you on that in this budget? Certainly you need more dollars to be able to, I think the numbers are low, how many you actually inspect or have been inspected. You need the technology.
Yeah, our
to move
ports of
forward.
entry need new technology and scanners that we just simply aren't scanning many shipping containers right now adequately. A lot of our air freight isn't scanned. Some of these scanners that we have in place need infrastructure around them so that they work in the heat and in the rain. Sometimes they're dysfunctional and shut down. We have railroad cars coming in that aren't getting inspected, and then small packages. Small packages every day that are being shipped in by the millions that we are not inspecting at all. So the kind of technology needs that we have to invest in are costly, but they're secure our country. And when we have a foreign enemy country like China and the PRC that's trying to kill off our next generation of Americans, which is what they're doing to weaken our economy and our society, those upgrades and that technology advancement will incredibly help us make sure that we know what's coming into this country and it's not a poison that will be killing our kids and our next generation.
Certainly have my support with that. I did chair this subcommittee at one point with the ranking member. He was chairing and I was ranking, so we're getting to know each other very well. You have my support there. I do want to say, and I am concerned about the FEMA issue. Coming from a small state that is subject to a lot of natural disasters, flooding in most cases, FEMA, my experience with FEMA, has it been flawless? Has it been, a smooth road? No, but I think it's a vital function, and I'm concerned if we turn it all over to the states. Capacity for the state to really handle this is something that, so I would ask you to tread lightly. I don't really need a response there, but I do want to put on the record here that I am concerned about, I do think we need a national response to disasters. Does it look just like FEMA? I hope, I hope the changes that are made will be able to have them to be able to react quickly and to help our state and local resources. I did invite you to the Advanced Training Center where we do training for Border Patrol. Look forward to seeing you there, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Senator Capito, and thrilled to hear about the morale at DHS. That's exciting, Madam Secretary.
Secretary Noem, good to see you again. Thanks for your leadership and the work that you've already done, and there's a lot more still to do, but y'all have had a pretty remarkable start in the process. And I'm very grateful. For 4 years, every single hearing we ever had with any DHS official was dominated by border, close it, close it, close it, close it, and excuses why they couldn't. It's kind of fun for me, actually, to be able to sit here and hear a conversation about FEMA, about Coast Guard, about all the other aspects of DHS that's out there, Secret Service, when all we had time to talk about was about border in the previous time. I had my team pull together just the March numbers for the last 4 years of border crossings. And what happened? If we go back to March of 2022, 222,000. 2023, 193,000. 2024, 189,000. And then this last March, 11,000. And to be able to see the dramatic difference that's happened in a very short period of time in the enforcement that's actually happened, it's given a deep breath to the nation. It's also given an opportunity for the folks at the border to catch up. I was in San Diego a couple of weeks ago, meeting with the Border Patrol folks in CBP and Coast Guard. They're in San Diego and their enforcement around the Tijuana border, and to be able to see what's happening. And the morale there is dramatically different, dramatically different from the times that I've been there in the past. You had mentioned Coast Guard as well, and I want to be able to just highlight that. Then I've got a whole bunch of other questions I want to go through, but just want to say thank you to you and your team for the work that's been done. Coast Guard folks are getting an additional pressure point there. Folks are getting on jet skis and panga boats and coming around. Coast Guard's not only saving lives, as we've seen in the past couple of weeks even, about some of these panga boats that are coming in that are capsizing out there. Coast Guard's rescuing and actually removing folks at the same time in the process. They've got to have additional cameras. They need different radar systems. They need additional people that are there. I saw some of the DOD personnel that's working alongside Coast Guard folks to be able to assist them from other agencies of DOD. They need additional folks there. So one of the questions I want to ask you was about Coast Guard and the plan. You mentioned that about additional assets, but there are radars, cameras, other things, including personnel, that they're going to need help on.
Yeah, I would say the Coast Guard, its mission set is pretty expansive. And most of the time, they're not only just doing search and rescue, they're out there doing interdiction on the water. They're also participating with the Navy in securing projects and missions worldwide. And, their cutters move faster and help work securing our warships and our aircraft carriers, and it's incredibly important, the work that they do. So we're grateful for that, but we also recognize that they've been neglected for years. They've got cutters that have been delayed. We're outmanned by Russia and China every day in the Arctic region, in the Indo-Pacific region as well. We need more assets, but down on the border specifically, you talked about the fact that these cartels are using faster boats with faster engines and jet skis to outmaneuver the Coast Guard, and that's how they're penetrating into the country and proliferating their drug use and human trafficking. So we're going to continue to get them the assets they need. They need airframe. They've got several that have been grounded because they can't even be maintained anymore. They need cutters, but they also need counter-UAS technology. Every cutter could use that. They see drones every day out there on the waters and in the work that they do that they can't find out why they're hovering over their mission set, what they're doing if they're weaponized, and then use that to protect our country. They also need satellite technology. They need new software systems and to be able to interact with law enforcement. Their communications. I talked to one Coastie when I was out spending time with them on the front line, and thank you for spending time with them, by the way, because that doesn't just mean the world to them. I think you learn in a different way truly what their needs are. One was carrying around 2 radios that probably weighed 5 to 7 pounds each. And I said, why are you carrying 2 radios? And he said, well, this one's an old one that doesn't really work, but this one is even older than that doesn't have some of the channels this one has. But, I have to carry 2 of them to cover all my bases. And, I wish we could get the newer one. Then I could put both of these down and it weighs half as much. So this guy's walking around with his belt filled with not only all of his other equipment, but also these radios. And it's that we can't afford to buy him a new radio that was already released 5 to 10 years ago, but we haven't upgraded for these individuals. So some of that stuff could be addressed and is very important for us to do so.
Well, thank you. Thanks for paying attention to that as well. That's going to be vital for us in the days ahead. Just quick comment on a couple of things on this. Our team has reached out to your team. There were a lot of things the previous administration would never turn over to us. We're doing some investigations to try to get data. For instance, on the Parole Plus programs that were done, we could never get any data on that. We're trying to figure out where are those people, what actually happened to all of them. And so we'd like to be able to get some of that information. So we've got several pending requests with your team just to be able to get those things. And the other thing is on the FEMA grants, based on the tornadoes and the storms that have come through much of the Midwest, including states like Kentucky and Oklahoma of late, some of the building resilient infrastructure and communities, some of those grants, there's a hold on, and we're just trying to be able to figure out the future of that. So just some additional information would help our communities to be able to prepare as well. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Absolutely.
Senator Blumenthal.
Pennsylvania, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for joining us here today. I would first like to start by thanking you for the incredible job that you've done securing our southern border in just the first 100 days of the Trump administration. Seeing a 90% decrease in encounters and apprehensions is an incredible job and is a testimony to your leadership and the leadership that we're seeing in this administration. There are two things that I would like to talk about today. First, sanctuary cities, and second, protecting American workers. What we see and hear in this committee today is the defense of violent, illegal immigrant criminals in our local communities. They are more focused on defending these violent criminals from deportation than they are on protecting American citizens in our local communities. And this plays out all across the country. In my local community in Northampton County, they have signed an Executive Order 2028, which bans ICE from arresting illegal immigrants when they're going through processing for a separate crime. And what this means in practice is that when ICE wants to go arrest a violent member of Tren de Aragua or a domestic abuser who is going through the processing in our local community, they cannot go inside that courthouse and actually arrest that person. They have to stake out the courthouse outside, taking up hours of resources from law enforcement, potentially leaving our community more vulnerable. If that person were to go out a different exit of the courthouse and escape into our local community, they would be free to rain terror all across our beautiful Lehigh Valley. So when we see people talking about due process, and when we hear about upholding the rule of law, there are people all across this country who want to defend sanctuary city status in violation of federal law. In violation of federal law, yet they want to stand here as hypocrites and say that they are doing the defense of due process and upholding the rule of law. So my question to you, Madam Secretary, is what can we do to hold these people accountable, elected officials which are placing Americans in jeopardy all across our country?
Yeah, in sanctuary cities and states across the country, they tie the hands of us to respond to the needs of the local community members. In many of them, even our law enforcement agents can't do their jobs because they're not allowing them into state-run facilities or to courthouses or to areas where they could interdict these criminals that at times are often violent criminals. We had an instance just recently where a murderer that committed a murder has been on the loose in a community, and that is a sanctuary city, and we're not able to find this individual yet because we have a lack of cooperation from local law enforcement. It not only endangers the public, but it endangers those officers that go out there every day, and they live in those communities too. This is where their kids go to school and they go to church and where they live, and they're demonized because of the defense that these individuals and members of this committee on the Democrat side perpetuate by defending criminals over their constituents. And so it's disheartening, but the responsibility of immigration laws and enforcement lies with the federal government, and we will continue to pursue law and order as long as President Trump is in the White House.
Well, I appreciate that, and I look forward to working with you to figure out how we can hold these local elected officials accountable to their actions, which endanger the safety of people all across our communities. Because ultimately, when we see bad policy like this, somebody is going to get hurt on the other end, and there needs to be accountability at the end of the day. The second thing I would like to talk about is protecting American workers. There have been numerous reports about how visas are being abused by foreign workers who come into our country, and then through things like the H-1B visa, for instance, are here doing short-term work as non-legal citizens, taking away jobs from American workers in places like the trucking industry. We've also heard about the hundreds of thousands of children that the Biden administration lost track of during their administration. Many of them were placed into forced labor and child labor situations in dangerous situations like meatpacking. So I would like to hear what the department is doing to crack down on these terrible behaviors and practices that went unchecked for many years during the Biden administration.
Absolutely. Well, we're partnering with all of our other federal agencies in a way that's really unprecedented to go after individuals that trafficked our children, that were involved in those operations, and then also to gather up their affiliates as well. You know, the Department of Health and Human Services is responsible for our refugee program, so adding integrity to that is very important, and make sure that when children come into our system, they may come in illegally or were trafficked in the past, that we're caring for them and returning them back to their families and to safe situations is very important. When you look at our visa programs, it's the Department of State that decides if a visa should be allocated to someone. It's the Department of Homeland Security that enforces that, that takes action on that. And we will continue to make sure that these programs are on task to why they were created, that they're being utilized for individuals who truly do love our country and recognize the opportunities our country provides them.
The gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Mr. Thanadar for...
Time has expired. Senator Moreno.
Thank you again, Secretary. So following up on the themes that were just brought up, it seems to me that the most common sense answer and the least expensive way to house criminal aliens in the country is to not allow them to come here in the first place, right? So it's whether it's $160 a day, $100,000 a day, it should be zero per day. And I hope that my Democrat colleagues, let's just codify what President Trump has done and prevent criminal aliens or anybody from entering this country illegally. That seems like the most fiscally conservative thing. So I hope when you're talking about these questions to the Secretary that we just say, let's just stop allowing people to come into the country illegally. By the way, that doesn't mean we don't want people to come here legally. That's the hypocrisy I just don't understand. When you're decrying the cost of housing criminal aliens, but you turned a blind eye. Well, we had 10 million people come into this country illegally. Shifting gears real quick, you were a governor. Would it surprise you to learn that you're rated one of the top 5 most fiscally conservative, frugal governors in America last year?
No, it wouldn't surprise me. I worked hard at making sure we were accountable to our taxpayers.
So you are going to commit, and I think it'd be obvious, that when you are appropriated money through the reconciliation process to help you do what you need to do, that you're going to be as fiscally prudent with that money, correct?
That is correct.
All right, so let's talk about what they need. Certainly there's a wall, but wall by itself, to Senator Peters' point, doesn't accomplish the mission. There's all kinds of advanced technology. I was visiting Anderle. They have some incredible technology for detection that makes the Border Patrol agents' lives. You're looking at technology like that, right?
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the discussions that we've had quite often with members of Congress and in these committee hearings, is just the wall will look very different based on where it is. Plus, the wall was never finished, even where you have a steel bollard wall. Many times they erected the steel bollard wall, but didn't build out the technology to support it and to keep individuals from throwing ladders and ropes over them. There's a whole system that was designed to operate together. And even when the wall was built, President Trump was never given the opportunity to complete the system that would actually secure it much better than just simple infrastructure.
Sure, so physical barrier, tunnel detections.
Yes,
technology
surveillance.
And some of these technologies can determine the difference between an animal and a human, can direct Border Patrol agents safely, let them know what they expect when they're there. So those are all the technologies. Let's talk about another part of what I would call the wall, which is the human element. How was the morale of the Border Patrol agents when you got there? When you took over day one and you visited them, kind of describe briefly what that was like.
Well, they were very discouraged. If you remember, many of us
I think
as
you're being kind of
governors
discouraged.
they were not allowed to do their jobs. They hired on to Border Patrol and ICE. I would say it's the same story to do a job, and they weren't allowed to do that by the last administration. So now they're.
So there's recruitment challenges.
Oh, there was, but not anymore. I mean, Border Patrol has a dramatic increase.
We have to make sure we pay them properly.
That's correct.
So that's part of the money, right, that we have raises for them. Near and dear to my heart is the automobiles that they use there. Describe the insanity of the kinds of vehicles that Biden and Mayorkas was giving. These are the most rugged terrains in America, boulders and rocks and hills. And they were sending F-150s out there with 17-inch wheels. And how many of the fleet was down just because of total and complete inability to accomplish the mission?
At times, it was upwards to 30 to 40% of the fleet just was unusable, not able to be maintained. Times the percentage would increase based on the conditions to which they were deployed as well.
And I know you and I have talked about this, but I just want to reinforce it on the record. We have a great company that builds cars in Ohio called Jeep. They make a Gladiator that would put giant tires and wheels on a car, and they would be an amazing Border Patrol agent. And I think even our chairman would love to see new automobiles so that the Border Patrol agents can do their job. And that's certainly part of the funding. Would that be something that you look at?
Yes, it's something that we need to address. We have to, in order for them to do their jobs, they have to have the right equipment.
Last question, is there anything else that we might not have asked you that you think is important for this committee to know?
Well, I think that you've covered a lot of the components. We haven't discussed the Secret Service, and I know that that's been a big topic for this committee in the past. I have the ability and the responsibility to oversee the Secret Service, and I just want you to know that we've gone away from the DEI recruitment directive that the Biden administration has utilized to recruit agents and what their purposes are, and we've made sure that they have the ability to do their job and protect the most powerful. And one of the statistics I think you would find to be helpful is we have an over 200% increase in applications to work for the Secret Service because of the work that Sean Curran and his team have done to really tell the mission and story of what they do every day and how important it is.
Thank you.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Chairman. First, thanks, Secretary Noem, for being here today. I want to take this opportunity to thank you and President Trump for returning the Department of Homeland Security to its core mission of securing the homeland and making communities safe again. We had an increase in threats under Biden and a complete open border. You have prioritized our border. Daily border encounters have plunged 95% since President Trump took office. Is that correct?
That is correct.
You're finishing the border wall. In 100 days, DHS already has 85 miles of new construction either planned or under construction.
That is correct.
That sound right?
Yes.
The Trump administration has reunited nearly 5,000 unaccompanied children with a safe relative or guardian after the Biden administration completely lost track of over 300,000 of these vulnerable minors. That sound right?
That is correct.
The United States Customs and Border Protection and the U.S. Coast Guard have seized nearly 232,000 pounds of fentanyl and other illicit drugs, stopping them from ever reaching American communities or Florida shores. Sound right?
That is correct.
And you are bringing accountability to the agency. It's incredible what we can do with a willing partner like you and President Trump, who actually want a secure border and enforce our laws. Secretary Mayorkas testified repeatedly before this committee and lied to my face, saying that our border was secure. Clearly, it was not. Worse, the Biden administration dismantled every process and system we had in place to secure the border and allowed millions of illegal aliens, including hundreds of known terrorists, to come into our country unchecked and unvetted, wreaking havoc and bringing drugs. They were welcomed into our country by Mayorkas and the Biden administration. Secretary Noem, you've been working for months to fix the mess your predecessor left behind. Is the border secure?
Yes, it is.
Besides additional resources, which you clearly need, what legislative fixes do you need from Congress to maintain a secure border?
Well, Senator, thank you for the question. This border is the most secure border that we've ever had in the history of the United States of America. But what we need to do is address the areas that are still vulnerable. And those areas require technology, wall infrastructure, more individuals at times. We need surveillance equipment, camera equipment to be fixed. Only 1 out of 3 CBP cameras are really functional right now. So the reconciliation package is incredibly important for us to have the resources we need at the border, but also to make sure that CBP can continue to do their work that they do of our ports of entry, assessing tariffs and collecting duties, all of that. But beyond that, reconciliation has needed assets for other areas of our national security portfolio. The fact of the matter is the Department of Homeland Security is one of the largest agencies with one of the smallest budgets. And the task that we have taken on is gotten more and more complicated all the time as things move online, cybersecurity, bad actors get more sophisticated. And now we've let these dangerous terrorists and cartel members into our country, in the interior of our country, that threaten the American public. They need to be removed. and taken out, and we're fighting a court system at times as well. So that reconciliation package makes sure that we're able to do due diligence in the work that we do and really assure the American people that we're on watch for them. Beyond that, Remain in Mexico policy to be codified would be incredibly important to make sure we have stability in that policy going forward. Some clarity and credible fear would be wonderful to have if this body would choose to tackle that. That would help us not have to deal consistently with court challenges and tie us up fighting that battle when we really should be addressing security concerns.
Miami is one of the 11 U.S. cities hosting matches for the upcoming World Cup. Can you discuss how DHS is preparing for that and how DHS is working with the state and the locals to make sure they have everything they need for a successful and secure event?
Yes, we are working diligently with FIFA and other entities to ensure that cities and states have the assets that they need. This will be an unprecedented world event. It'll take place in 3 different countries and many cities across our country, but also Mexico and Canada, and it will take place over a month. It's the equivalent to 10 different Super Bowls, and we will at times have 11 different matches going on in the country on the same day, and making sure we're supporting security operations in all of these cities is imperative. So having the conversations now, there's meetings happening almost every single day between our department, the White House, the federal government, and FIFA and these cities, to ensure that we have the protocols in place, the guidelines in place, universal approach to how they're going to be applied, and then what we can do to secure not just the ground and territory and access to these events, but also the air space above it. We need counter-drone technology. We need to have jurisdiction to be able to make sure that we're dealing with those threats as they present themselves, but also make sure that we have the men and women that are trained and prepared to secure them going forward. It will be safe and it will be secure. It's a lot of work because we've never done anything like this before, though.
Well, thank you for all your hard work and your team.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Mr. Siscomani, the floor is yours for your second round of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, so the first set of questions that I had were more on the security side. I want to shift gears a little bit. Matter of fact, I just guided a group of freshman members on the Republican side to the border in Arizona with the intention that they see the full picture of the border. We have obviously the security aspect that has been key as central to the conversation, that we have trade and commerce at the border, and we've got immigration as well going on. So it's important that I think my colleagues and everyone that is maybe not from a border district can understand that there's a lot more that happens at the border than just one aspect of it. I call it the 3 buckets of the conversation around the border. So with that in mind, that as an immigrant myself, I know how complex the immigration system is. I became a citizen in 2006, and then 16 years later, I became a member of Congress. No other country in the world will give you that opportunity. I believe in the American dream and fighting for that American dream that so many people still seek. There's been much media attention again on the increase in deportations and removal of aliens, which I remain fully supportive of. That being said, I think we should also be highlighting and incentivizing those who are going through the process legally and those that are seeking to come to the country through the legal channels, and make that process less burdensome in order to disincentivize the use of cartels and bad actors. In my family's experience, it took us 13 years from the moment we came into the U.S. to the moment we became U.S. citizens. There have to be some improvements around these guidelines. So can you speak on how your budget request will facilitate easier legal pathways for potential immigrants?
Yeah, absolutely. And you've correctly identified part of the problem that we've had in this country for many, many years is that it takes far too long for a person to legally come through our immigration process and to become a U.S. citizen. And that needs to be fixed, and that was broken when I was here on the Hill, and it was broken when I was governor, and I still see as the Department of Homeland Security Secretary that needs an issue that needs to be solved. We need to make sure that we're getting more immigration judges. I've been having conversations with our Attorney General, Pam Bondi, and with the Department of Justice on what we can do to get more judges to the table so that we can process not just backlogged claims, but illegal applications to come to this country as well, and then more immigration courts. So when you look at not just the fiscal year 26 request, but also reconciliation dollars, it is to address the needs that we have to address the invasion, secure the border, to make sure that our ICE officers have enough backup, help, equipment, and tools going forward to make sure that we're addressing what has happened here criminally and illegally, but also addressing within our other agencies what we can do to make sure that we're processing those legal applications and getting that taken care of. President Trump is determined to do that, and we have that addressed in the budget request from the different cabinet secretaries and agencies to make sure we have the resources to start getting after that backlog.
Excellent, excellent. You know, on the same topic of when we look at immigration and we look at workforce as well, those are very much attached. I just had Secretary Lori Chavez-Dreamer in Tucson yesterday. We visited different sites that work on this. We spoke at length about the need for more robust workforce programs and ways to ensure that workforce needs meet our community's needs. Still, the utmost constant thing I hear from industry of what they need is workforce. Can you speak to any plans the administration has to create additional avenues to meet these through immigration, potentially?
So you're talking about meeting workforce needs?
Yeah,
as
workforce
far as through
needs.
visas and green
Yeah.
cards? You know, I would say that the president recognizes the value in what we've had in programs in the past, but also recognized how they've been misused. And how Congress many times lays their prerogative on how many are authorized, how many are directed through law, that the Secretary has the latitude to issue, and will continue to work with you to find solutions that really meet the needs that we have in this country. You know, the President believes that we have a workforce here that deserves jobs, that pay very well with benefits and a future here in the United States of America, but also that we need to continue to keep the American dream open for immigrants who want to come here legally. So having the opportunity to make sure we're doing thorough vetting of people and partnering with other countries and having access to their background checks to make sure they can participate in our visa programs is very important. And as long as we have the ability to do that and continue to know who's coming here, why they're here, and if they have the opportunity to become citizens, then it's something that would be a benefit to this country if the president recognizes that the need is there.
I think that's very well put. I think having that balance always of making sure our border is secure, we know who's coming in, that opens the door and allows us to focus on the immigration system that works for the people coming in, but primarily for our citizens and what the country needs. And that has to do with workforce as well. So with that, thank you so much for partnering with us on that and finding multiple solutions to this problem in different areas at the same time. Is not easy, but you're doing a masterful job. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And with that, I yield back, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for not, or Vice Chairman, for not challenging the Dan Newhouse Award. And now I'd like to
You got in this position. Thank you.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Crane, for 5 minutes.
I want to thank you, Ms. Noem, for coming here today and giving us your testimony. I also want to thank you for the amazing work that yourself and everybody at Homeland Security have done to not only secure our border within just a couple weeks, but also to start deporting folks that aren't supposed to be here in the first place. Secretary Noem, I'm very concerned about the behavior of one of my colleagues on this very committee, who we saw assaulting both verbally and physically federal law enforcement officers just last week on national television. Ms. Noem, what kind of message do you think it sends to the country and radical political agitators that she sits here today, not being charged for a crime, to participate in today's hearing?
Well, Congressman, I believe that what you saw last Friday at Delaney Hall was not oversight. I believe that it was breaking into a federal facility and assaulting law enforcement officers. This Congresswoman was surrounded by people who were criminals that were taking criminal actions. And so we need to be honest about what happened there. And we also need to talk about the fact that we have always facilitated visits and tours of federal facilities. We would continue to do that as well. And we would encourage that they work with us to do that in the future rather than to do the unprecedented destructive actions that the Congresswoman and her colleagues engaged in last Friday.
Ms. Noem, do you think her presence here today emboldens others to behave in the very same way?
I think it would be sad if that's the testimony of what happened last Friday that gets perpetuated. I was shocked when I watched it and saw it, and was extremely discouraged to see that the colleagues that surround those three defend them. Because those actions, we wouldn't want our kids to act that way, our children, our grandchildren to act that way. That's not the America that we dreamed and envisioned for our country. America should be a land of opportunity and where laws are enforced, and there's consequences for breaking the law.
Thank you. Ms. Noem, are you familiar with Article 1, Section 9, Clause 2 of the Constitution that covers the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus?
Yes.
It says that the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless, when cases of rebellion or invasion, the public safety may require it. Are you aware of which presidents have suspended the writ of habeas corpus?
I know that President Lincoln did.
Yeah, also Roosevelt and President Grant. You testified under oath, I believe, that the Biden administration allowed an invasion into our country. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So do you think it falls under the constitutional guidelines that I just read to you?
I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but I believe it does.
You've also witnessed that the Democrats here today and also radical activist judges are trying to halt and deny the president's agenda to carry out his constitutional duties to keep Americans safe and carry out his promise to the American people to secure the border and carry out mass deportations of those who have entered the country illegally. Knowing this, are you open and supportive of this constitutional option to suspend the writ of habeas corpus to keep Americans safe and carry out the president's agenda?
Well, this is something that's not in my purview to weigh in on. This is the president's prerogative to pursue, and he has not indicated to me that he will or will not be taking that action.
I want to thank Rogan O'Hanley for his efforts to bring this constitutional solution into the national conversation. Now I want to shift gears real quick. Ms. Noem, on May 5th, 2025, I joined Congressman Zinke and 8 of my fellow Republican colleagues in asking why it was appropriate for DOD and DHS to require real IDs for entry into Arlington National Cemetery.
I did see that letter this week, sir.
My question, what information can you share on the security posture of Arlington Cemetery that require real ID?
Well, sir, I'm not certain as to the procedures and the requirements at Arlington Cemetery. I do know that real ID at our airports for travel was required by statute and law change over 20 years ago. So that has been implemented on May 7th, and we have over 90% compliance that has happened at our airports since then. And overwhelmingly, the vast majority of travelers have had a real ID and have utilized that or a federally recognized ID going forward. But as far as what is required at Arlington Cemetery, I have not been in the knowledge of what those requirements are.
In that case, would you consider taking a look at that and also consider recommending repealing that requirement?
I can certainly take a look at that and follow up with a conversation with you, absolutely.
Thank you. I yield back.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Ogles, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Second round of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you again for your patience, Madam Secretary. And we know, obviously, states like mine, Iowa and South Dakota, are not necessarily border states, but certainly every state did become a border state under the previous administration with that chaos we saw. And the consequences of that porous border really reach far beyond the Rio Grande River there, the deadly fentanyl coming into our communities, the adversaries taking advantage and exploiting our immigration system. And so that's what I kind of want to touch on is the adversaries and what they were able to do, specifically China. To put it in perspective, in the first 7 months of fiscal year 2024, more than 27,000 Chinese nationals were encountered at the southern border. Under President Trump, we've seen that number drop significantly, reflecting that clear shift in deterrence and enforcement. So can you walk us through what specific mechanisms have been put in place to ensure that these individuals from adversarial nations are now being thoroughly vetted, and how that process has changed since the previous administration?
Yes, and every country is being treated the same as far as how we are treating the folks that are there and here illegally. People that came into this country from China and from other countries are all being vetted and their background checks being gone through. And I would say some of the reasons that we've had to reevaluate some of the programs that were abused under the Biden administration is because countries weren't participating with us. They weren't sharing their information. One of the things I've challenged Canada with in a lot of the discussions that we've had over recent months was they weren't taking their own citizens back home that were here in this country illegally, and they weren't sharing all of the criminal background checks of individuals who were in our country illegally. They weren't telling us who they were or what they had done, if they had human smuggling in their background or crimes. And so that was some of the access that we were asking them for. We were grateful that they addressed, for instance, designating a fentanyl czar and doing, but that information sharing is critically important. And we do not have that kind of partnership with China. We didn't just see Chinese nationals infiltrate our country over the southern border. They're coming over the northern border as well. And we see needs on the Great Lakes region and people coming in. It's easy to access Canada, and once they do, then they drop down into our vulnerable areas. So we have continued to maintain resources and strengthen them at the northern border as well. But we work closely with Interpol that has an agreement with many different countries to do vetting and background checks and criminal background information sharing on folks across the world. But many of the times when the State Department is negotiating on repatriation and travel documents, they are having discussions on what we can do to share information. When I made trips to El Salvador, to Colombia, and to Mexico, those trips were made so that I could get those governments to share more information with us. In fact, one of the things that we did while we were there is sign new agreements with those countries to share more data and information, to have them give us biometric information that they collected, to give us more thorough travel documents of individuals that were of concern here and had been breaking our laws. And so having those discussions gives us more information to make sure that this country is safer into the future.
Do you feel like those conversations have helped to inform broader national security efforts?
Absolutely.
Cross-departmentally, and when we think about the real risk here, it's these international transnational criminal gangs, the cartels, state-sponsored networks. Obviously we talk about the Chinese nationals, and the reason the PRC is not cooperating and the CCP is not cooperating is because they are intent on infiltrating our country.
That is correct.
Do you feel like all those relationships are really helping us to strengthen the intel that we are able to gather?
Absolutely. We've seen many, many times where information that we got on somebody who was here that may have been on our terrorist watch list, suspected terrorist watch list, or someone who is a very dangerous part of a foreign terrorist organization, that information may have been shared with us from another country because of those security agreements that we have in place. And when countries do not adhere to sharing that type of information, they don't get the privileges necessary that have been granted to them in the past. And we've seen that with visa overstays. We've seen that with lack of information sharing, that perhaps they don't get to continue in programs that are under the purview of the Department of Homeland Security because they haven't been willing partners to help us secure our country.
Yeah, certainly accountability is back, and appreciate that. So thank you so much, Madam Secretary.
Right. Thank you.
I yield back.
Recognize the gentleman from, oh, she's gone, from Texas. Mr. Gonzalez, the floor is yours for a second round.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary. Some could argue you have one of the toughest jobs in Washington, right? We had Elon show up with 2 hats. Maybe you should have shown up with 3 hats, right? Part of DHS that I worry about is it's a Swiss Army knife of the federal government. It seems like everything is in there. And we alluded to this earlier. How did DHS start? It started after 9/11 when Islamic extremists murdered Americans. And so I worry. We covered a lot of topics today. And I know the border gets a lot of attention, and I know there's a lot going on in the cyberspace. But I think back to some of the fundamentals. And I think back to 9/11, and I worry. I go, I look ahead, and I see, the World Cup coming our way, and I see the Olympics coming our way. I want us to make sure that we're not only focused on today, but we're also focused on tomorrow. Please keep that at the forefront of it. At the end of the day, right now we're feeding tomahawks to Houthis every day in Yemen, and it reminds me a whole lot of pre-9/11, right? I spent 5 years in Iraq and Afghanistan. No one knew about al-Qaeda. No one knew where Afghanistan was on a map. It's very eerily similar, and the American people are really counting on you to make sure we're safe. On that note, DHS has lost its way over the last course of the last several years in their last administration, and I want to flag for you an office in particular, the Office of Immigration, Detention, Ombudsman. I mean, this was literally an office funded by taxpayer dollars that had billboards up that, and I quote, said throughout Texas, said, "Your brother in immigration custody has rights. We're here to help." I I mean, it's complete nonsense. And once again, where are our taxpayer dollars going? So as you're, you're off to a very fast start, much appreciated. But as you're going through these and you're tackling these different, please look at that program. You know, I know in our fiscal year 25 budget, we zeroed that out, but unfortunately we couldn't get that over the finish line. So I'd ask for you to really take a look at that.
Congressman, we have looked at that already. We have recognized the abuses that happened. And many times that office was perpetuated on suing themselves and coming up with ways to cost the taxpayer more and more money. So we've put them back to what the size that they should be and addressed how it was misused and abused, and will continue to do so into the future to make sure that that isn't weaponized against the American people in the future.
Thank you for that. And I also want to thank you for something that is working. These HSI-led task forces work. You've seen it all throughout the country. It's how do we pool our resources? This isn't a federal issue. It isn't a state issue. It isn't a local issue. It's all of us. We're all in on this together. And in my experience, those task forces really work. So when it comes to funding, when it comes to legislation, once again, please, if you would, they're working. I'm hearing it from constituents all over the country. My good friend Juan Ciscomani, I know it's working in Arizona. It's certainly working in Texas. And then the other thing I want to mention is Stone Garden funding. Once again, this is something, it's an area that I believe is a force multiplier. It gives funding to our local law enforcement that are acting in the immigration space. This works. One of the issues that I see is sometimes it's a little too stringent. It's a little too, it almost like the federal government is discouraging local law enforcement from being involved. Maybe that's something we can tackle together. I'd love to hear your ideas, not now, but as you work through things on how we can, once again, make sure that our programs are working for the American people, not against us.
I agree. Yeah, I think that'd be fantastic. I've heard it's a highly effective program, and if there's ways to get more participants and streamline.
Chairman, I yield back my minute of time.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, for the fine work that you've done. I also want to thank you for approving the members on this side of the aisle, and myself included, in our assertion through the last 4 years that what happened at the southern border was done willfully and purposely by the Biden administration, because nobody could be that dumb. Do you share that opinion?
Sir, I believe it was a decision made by the previous president to not enforce our laws and to allow an invasion of our country.
So all the claims by the other side of the aisle that we needed more money for the Biden administration, we need more people, et cetera, do you believe that was accurate, or do you believe that was inaccurate?
No, sir, that was not true.
That's absolutely, because the numbers speak for themselves. And simply by enforcing our laws and having the will to enforce our laws, we've seen a dramatic fall in the number of crossings. And so I want to thank you for that. Now I want to switch over to FEMA. I used to be the mayor of Miami-Dade County. I used to represent, and really it was my job to protect 2.8 million people in one of the most hurricane-prone areas of the United States. I was also a city manager of the city, and I was a fire chief for the city of Miami. And at the time, I was also on a FEMA advisory panel. And I can tell you that FEMA needs many reforms. I remember as mayor of Miami-Dade County in 2015, we were still processing claims through FEMA for Hurricane Katrina, which happened 10 years earlier. And so while I do support the efforts to reform FEMA, there are certain states and cities and counties that actually can respond a heck of a lot better than others. And we can't leave those that can't fend for themselves, to fend for themselves. And so I would hope that that's part of your review and the reform of FEMA. Is that what you plan to do?
Yes, sir. We know that every single state is not prepared today to take over their emergency operations. That's why the president has been clear that he wants to empower states and give them the opportunity to build out their response, to also sign MOUs with surrounding states and other resources they can use to best serve their people. He just doesn't believe that FEMA has been successful in being there in a time of crisis for people.
And I can tell you, ma'am, as mayor of Miami-Dade County, that they haven't. Yeah. Okay, and that I never ever, when I talk to my people, I said, hey, we're going to have to do this ourselves. Right. There is no cavalry coming from the federal government. We have to take care of ourselves. All we need from the federal government really is the money to reimburse us. And you're not even good at doing that, okay? And so hopefully you can speed that process up. There are some people in my community that are a little bit concerned about the TPS rules and the suspension of TPS. I would request that you can meet with myself, Representative Mario Diaz-Balart, and Maria Salazar, so maybe we can do a little nuance to this so that we can put those concerns at rest. I also sent a letter to you concerning 100 Cuban oppressors. They're actually living in the United States that were granted either asylum or entry into the United States that should have never been here, and we need to deport those. Have you received that letter, or what's your department doing about looking into and vetting those 100 names that I gave you?
Yes, sir. I received your letter and read it this week, and will be responding to you. And that is something that President Trump is focused on, is adding integrity back to the programs that we have. Our immigration programs, our services like TPS, like the visa waiver program, our parole, our asylum programs, a lot of those got perverted and changed and misused and abused during the last administration. And adding integrity back to them is incredibly important for this administration. TPS was always meant to be a temporary program.
I agree.
Built on giving people an opportunity to be safe from violence or environmental crisis that may be happening in their home country. Those individuals, we're working with them, and we'll have a chance to meet with you and the other congressmen to address their needs and see what their options are. They do have 60 days from the time it is published. Those individuals that you spoke to me about, that still has not been published in the Federal Register, so they have several months here that we can work on the solutions to make sure that they're in a program that's appropriate for their situation.
Fair enough, ma'am. I appreciate that, and I hope we can have that meeting soon. Finally, I'm going to give you another example. When I was mayor of Miami-Dade County, there was then Senator Kamala Harris and a lot of other Democrats were demonstrating outside a homestead facility that was meant for children, saying how bad the conditions were, et cetera, et cetera. Well, as mayor of Miami-Dade County, I asked to actually go in there. I viewed it. I went in there. Since I speak Spanish, I actually spoke to the children. They're all being treated great. There was nothing happening there that would make me ashamed to be an American. And so what was great about that, it was that we were actually taking care of those children, unlike what happened under the Biden administration when we lost about 300,000 of them. With that, I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr.